7 years ago, the little girl ran with all her might through the snow, trying to escape her pursuers. Her parents wanted their beloved daughter to survive at all costs. But now the enemies, along with their dogs, were catching up to her. Her family died tragically, so now the girl needed to survive by any means. When she had no strength left, the protagonist leaned against a tree. Just then, a bearded man discovered her, mounted on a noble steed. He dismounted and asked the little girl if she was okay. But she, frightened, stepped back a few paces. The man perfectly understood that she was afraid of him, but it was very cold, and the poor thing was surely freezing, so he offered her his warm cloak. It was a miracle that such a small creature could survive in the forest. The girl extended a trembling hand toward the cloak, and the savior supposed she came from a distant place. The man introduced himself as Count Dalbury, a local nobleman. He discovered that the little girl's name was Dayan. Currently, enemy knights have camped near Dalbury's territory. The captain of the soldiers received, once again, an invitation to the ball. Everyone desperately wants him to marry their daughters, so they write him letters full of nonsense. Secretary Jeffer explained that his lord stands out among other men. At 12, Exar Malhut obtained the title of count, and at 28 he was still single. But the blonde saw no point, as marriage depends on the wealth and status of the parents. The secretary advised his lord to marry a princess, as it is the best option if he wants wealth and fame. All women are the same, you just have to choose the one who offers you the most. But Exar still believed he would find the girl of his dreams. Jeffar's gaze became skeptical. The master was such a famous womanizer that even the king had to intervene. Therefore, he surely won't be able to find that woman. Deciding to change the subject, Jeffer told what he heard about the death of Count Dalbury, not understanding why the master came, since this is nothing like him. It is true, the powerful aristocrats remind Exar of repulsive hyenas. They launch war against the weak, and the king does nothing, because he wants the feudals to weaken and exhaust their strength, all because the aristocrats have become so strong that they now threaten the royal family. The king, by not intervening in the fight of the aristocrats, has become almost invisible, so he decided to crush their power. But the land of the deceased Count Dalbury, the small land of Orank, remained at peace, as if time had stopped there. The local castle is not built in the best way, and besides, there are few soldiers. However, the local inhabitants fight side by side to stop the enemy. The secretary concluded that the combat power is minimal, so it's only a matter of time before they crush them. And if the small castle of Orank doesn't fall, the rumor will spread that Exar's army is worthless. But the situation is good, so there shouldn't be any problems. However, in Exar's opinion, nothing is good here, as the enemy's morale is quite high. He had heard that Dalbury was a good man, but he didn't think it was worth risking one's life for him. Jeffar reported that they recently received a response. Previously, the count warned that they would massacre them if Dalbury's subjects did not open the gates. But now the response arrived. On one sheet, in beautiful female calligraphy, it was written that these gates would only open to the ruler. This war is just a game for Exar, as he hides his true objectives from the royalty and the aristocrats. Orang was simply unlucky to cross his path. But just when the sword is at her throat, this bold woman dares to write something like that. Exar had seen countless maidens, but he had never come across one like her. Therefore, it has become wildly interesting to know who she is. There is no doubt left. These people plan to continue digging in for defense. The count decided to confirm if Dalbury had 2 children, and the secretary instantly confirmed the information. The eldest was named Alvin, and the youngest was born to the second wife, who was much younger. Currently, this woman, Mary Dalbury, is in charge there. But Exar didn't believe the young countess dared to resist the siege. According to his calculations, they should have surrendered on the first day. Moreover, that wife's faction is already ready to hand over the castle. The blonde let out a small laugh. He didn't understand. Was he really fighting against the cowardly Alvin? But Jeffar replied that now, alongside the count's eldest son, there is a pleasant-looking slave. Apparently, she was a concubine of the deceased count. Most likely, that woman controls Alvin, and she is the one who, in the most brazen way, dares to challenge Exar Malhut. Apparently, this girl is still loyal to the one who once extended a hand to her. 7 years ago, she was rescued by the count, and now, at 20 years old, she possesses a charisma and a unique charm. Exar felt the desire to meet her, and Jeffar skeptically replied that he didn't doubt it at all. The blonde suggested demolishing the castle right away, but the secretary asked him how exactly he planned to do it. Despite the total isolation and the impossibility of obtaining outside information, they only need to hold out for a week. First, this year the cold will arrive early. And second, a third of Garon's territory borders the sea. The army will have to retreat due to the threat of a pirate attack from the sea. And third, on the day of Count Dalberry's death, this woman wrote a petition and gave it to a soldier, ordering him to take it to the palace. She was evidently brave, so Exar became even more interested in her. If the petition reaches the king, then he will intervene. Exar asked how the slave was getting along with the second wife, and discovered that it would be convenient for the countess to get rid of her. Since she does not want bloodshed, the lord reported that, in that case, he has a gift for the second wife. She hasn't left the castle in a long time, and surely forgot what going to lavish balls is like. Exar ordered them to report that he has a special gift, which will help the countess revive everything, and that they did not come as enemies. But the commander wants to protect this land from invasions by other lords, since in the past he and Dalberry made a promise, when the latter was still alive. As soon as the gates open, the blonde will go look for the slave, and Jeffar will take care of the deceased count's second wife. The wild plan worked, and soon they were inside. The secretary asked his lord to be cautious, as if they are discovered, the situation will spiral out of control. Exar, silently, began to look around to find the desired girl, and suddenly his eyes opened wide. On the high wall stood a maiden, staring fixedly at him. The man revealed his face and smiled confidently, as he had managed to find his target. The secretary called his lord and reported that it wasn't time yet. And then, Shefar asked Rob to make sure his lord didn't do anything foolish. When it's time to return, they will blow the horn twice, so they must not let his holiness escape. Just at that moment, a knight approached the beautiful young woman, said something to her, and she left. Exar's eyebrows involuntarily furrowed. He suddenly winced and exclaimed that his stomach hurt terribly, so he urgently needed to go to the bathroom. The man ran off so fast that Sephar didn't even have time to say anything. Near the wall, the blonde spotted several locals. Behind the walls, the war rages, and these people are relaxing here with a jug of beer. You can tell they are Dalberry soldiers. Exar decided to climb the wall to look for the girl there. He stood in the exact spot where she had been minutes before, but decided not to linger, and find the slave quickly before she got away. As he descended from the wall, the count overheard two locals saying that the beautiful slave was at the well. Just at that moment, a horn sounded. Rob approached the master, so it was time to leave. The blonde took off his helmet and asked, annoyed, if the knights now obeyed Jeffar. And not him. Rob burst out laughing and replied that the secretary only wants what is best for his holiness. Tossing the helmet to the knight, Exar declared he was thirsty, but in reality, he wanted something that now seemed unattainable. Walking towards the well, the man quickly found the desired girl. She stopped dead and froze, looking at him in surprise. The sounds faded, and the girl's serene gaze caused a strange unease in his heart. She turned and observed the man with indifference. At that precise moment, their gazes crossed, and Count Malhut's heart began to beat rapidly. Her piercing dark eyes seemed bottomless. At that very moment, Exar firmly decided that she would belong to him, but the beautiful heroine got up from her seat and hurried to leave, which tensed up the blonde. He quickly caught up to the beauty and planted himself right in front of her. The young woman's face remained impassive, and this deeply wounded the man's pride. Frowning and drawing a smile on his lips, even surrounded by enemy knights, the brunette shows not a shred of fear. Daeon calmly replied that the horn had sounded, and it was time for the men to leave. The blonde touched her chin and said that her little voice was very beautiful. The man was charmed by her. Then Exar stepped away, and opening his arms, explained that he simply wanted something to drink. After the man asked for a glass of water, Daeon went to get a bucket. After filling it with water, she brought it to the stranger, but he suddenly grabbed her hand and pulled her towards him, causing the girl to drop the bucket. The young woman looked at the knight in astonishment, as his face began to approach rapidly, and the next instant, Exar's lips brushed against hers. The kiss was soft and almost imperceptible, but neither of them closed their eyes. The blonde pulled away and looked closely at the beauty. He smiled and thanked her for the refreshment, although he thought it was the first time he yielded to his instinct. Next time he would like to drink more. Dawn didn't reply anything, and her face remained stony, showing no emotion whatsoever. And then she left the man and walked away. Exar expected her to at least blush, but not even that happened, which made him feel awful. Soon, the knights headed towards the gate exit. Jeffar instantly knew that his lord was charmed by that woman. He informed his lordship that tomorrow at 4 in the afternoon, they could open the gates again. But the second wife set several conditions, including personally executing the eldest son, Count Alvin, and also helping the younger son inherit Dalberry's lands. If they agreed, they had to hoist a red flag at the camp before sunset. Mounted on his horse, Exar announced that they would have lunch at the castle tomorrow. The next day, at 4 in the afternoon, Countess Dalberry came out to receive the troops with her young son. The enemy should be received in mourning, but this woman dressed like a peacock, and in very bad taste. Mary Dalberry curtsied and said it was an honor for her. Although the woman might still be planning something, she decided to surrender. The blonde dismounted, took the countess's hand, and said she was as beautiful as the rumors said. A smug smile appeared on Mary's lips. The unsuspecting woman calmly let the enemy knights into the castle territory. Soon the solemn feast began. Exar was bored. He thought the countess would be somewhat intelligent, but apparently not. This whole celebration deeply irritated the man. The hall was filled with songs, performed by musicians with cheerful smiles. As soon as the count heard in the melody that it was impossible to breathe in the Winter Kingdom, he raised his hand. The musicians stopped playing instantly. Exar coldly asked if this song was meant to mock him. It seemed he was unwelcome, but the countess exclaimed it was just a misunderstanding. The blonde smiled slyly and decided to ask why they were playing it then. The street musicians began to apologize to the lord, as they did not want to offend anyone. Exar sighed tiredly and added that the taste of the alcohol had also been ruined. At that precise moment, Count Malhut's knights abruptly stood up and drew their swords. Exar casually recalled that there is a slave in that castle, beautiful as a goddess. He would love to see her. Trying to put on a friendly smile, the countess told the lord that this girl is just a country bumpkin. She used to spend every night in her husband's room, and when he died, the commoner stayed in Alvin's room. But even when Count Dalberry was alive, she met secretly with his eldest son, and Dawn hardly played hide-and-seek with them. Obviously, that girl is only interested in rich men. In short, the brunette is very promiscuous, so it is best for a noble lord to have nothing to do with her. Besides, she's not even that pretty. They are only interested in her because she is a foreigner. Looking at Count Malhut, Mary ran into his cold gaze. The countess frowned and disdainfully reported that she would introduce them. Dawn entered the hall, and immediately all the aristocrats felt an immense stench coming from the girl. Stains remained in her footprints, and the scene was appalling. Exar couldn't contain his laughter. He instantly understood that Countess Dalberry was simply envious of this beauty. That's why she intentionally threw Dawn into the pigsty. But for a slave, the girl looks even dignified. It is usually shameful to appear like this. But Daeon, on the contrary, looks proud. Exar wanted to know what he had to do to conquer the heart of this brunette. A smile appeared on the man's lips, and he pronounced that this girl is simply gorgeous. Countess Mary Dalberry couldn't hide her irritation. Now Jeffar understood why his lord was so obsessed with that girl. The secretary was sure His Highness would use his beloved methods to make that proud young woman his. As soon as he thought about it, Exar declared that from today that slave would belong to him. The countess indignantly exclaimed that she was just a commoner, but Count Malhut promised to give something in return. Daeon asked where Lord Elvin was now. The blonde frowned and pondered. Was she asking about Elvin for his safety, or was she truly in love with him? Exar haughtily replied that the crows were already pecking at his corpse. But right after those words, the beautiful young woman's face did not change at all, and remained stony. But unexpectedly, she decided to ask the count if he would do the same to his second wife. And her son, Mary Dalberry, screamed whether the girl even understood what she was talking about. Count Malhut couldn't contain his laughter. He decided to ask the slave why she thought he would kill those people. Dawn calmly replied, "They are enemies of Orang and came armed, so they want to take and control it. But I doubt they can rule themselves, so someone else will be appointed. The second wife will not be loyal to the lord, so the count will not leave him this territory, because whoever betrays once will betray again. Besides, his lordship will not put someone who killed his son, even if he is not of blood." Mary exclaimed that she did not kill Alvin, but Exar calmly replied that the slave was right, as he would not entrust the territory to someone he cannot trust. He called the knights and ordered the execution of the old woman and her son, as well as all the other aristocracy. The soldiers carried out the order immediately. Soon, the bloodied bodies began to be thrown into the garbage. Daeon remained there motionless, her face impassive to the unleashed brutality. She didn't even blink. The secretary suggested the master report the castle's capture to the king and sign off. But Exar refused, stating he would do it tomorrow. An interesting evening awaited him tonight. Interesting. The first thing was to order the maids to clean the nauseating stench off Daeon. Then, they dressed the brunette in a beautiful dress that enhanced her figure. However, one of the maids was indignant that this brazen woman killed the mistress, and that, because of that horrible woman, they did not forgive the young master either. The woman grabbed the brush and began to roughly brush Daeon's hair, but she did not complain about the pain. Meanwhile, the maid indignantly asked the slave how she intended to manage at night after what she did. Because of her, so many died. The Dalbury family came to an end. Dawn silently listened to the servants' arguments. She even fell when the maid abruptly stuck a hairpin in her hair, scratching her scalp. The maid's companion asked her to stop, as the girl might tell the new master everything. But the resentful maid was sure that the brazen one would do nothing, because she always keeps everything to herself. Soon the preparations were over, and Daeon was to be taken to Lord Malhut's private chambers. Before that, the girl asked the man to bring her lavender perfume. However, the knight replied that unfortunately it was impossible, as he could not leave the young woman alone there. Daeon suggested simply closing the door. The man accepted and promised to return soon. Immediately after, the soldier went out and locked the door. Hearing the characteristic sound, the protagonist immediately turned towards the window. She threw it open and gazed at a beautiful twilight sky. Orange and purple clouds floated gently on the horizon. Without wasting more time, she took out the pieces of cloth she had hidden and began tying them hurriedly. When everything was ready, Dawn threw one end of the makeshift rope out the window. She tied the other to the window grate, and then she climbed out the window. Showing not a trace of fear of falling, the young woman slowly began to escape from the castle, which would soon be her prison. Once on the ground, Dawn immediately started running. It was always like this, just when the protagonist started to think everything would go well. In the end, she had to flee. As long as she is alive, nothing is decided. Although sometimes dying seems easier, Dawn has a reason to live, and she intends to follow it to the end. Even if she becomes an old woman, the heroine must move forward. That's what Daeon promised her mother. She now leaves Albury Castle, which means the young woman once again has no place to find peace. And smile again. Exar slammed the wine glass against the table and furiously demanded that they repeat what they had just said. Only now does he learn that, somehow, Daeon managed to escape the castle. The responsible knight explained guiltily that he left her alone for a moment, and she escaped through the window. The count held his head, exhausted, and abruptly ordered that she be found. And then his voice broke into a cry, and the man howled for the soldiers to finally do something. And search every corner. We must find the girl, whatever the cost. The knights ran to carry out the order, and Exar leaned back tiredly in his chair. Shefar suggested it was for the best. A woman like that would be difficult to handle. Better to forget her. The blonde abruptly asked his secretary if he dared to give him orders now. But Shefar began to explain that that girl was smart. Having her close was dangerous. Who knows when she would betray? Surely the commoner fled when she realized she wouldn't be able to control the master, since his holiness clearly doesn't resemble the late Count Dalbury or his eldest son, Alvin. However, Exar ordered her to be found and added that he would not repeat himself. He wanted the runaway returned to him immediately. The man desired it so much that the crystal glass in his hand cracked and his eyes burned with intense determination. After interrogating the staff, the count discovered that no one knew where she had fled. Jeffar released the frightened servants, lest they suffer his holiness's wrath. Exar concluded that Daon planned to escape from the start. He asked his secretary if there was any news, but the man replied no. Without another word, the blonde stood up and headed towards the exit. Exar decided to personally lead the search party. The man was determined to find the runaway and subdue her so she would belong to him. Tracking dogs were even used in the search. The count was giving orders left and right, but after several hours of searching, there were no results. A femme fatale is hiding from trained royal soldiers. Entire squads cannot find her. That's why a burning fury consumed Exar inside. Where the hell did she go in the middle of the night? Jeffar informed his lord that the sun was rising, and they had to return to the castle. The blonde was surprised that so much time had already passed. A smile appeared on his lips when he thought that Daon was not easy, which excited Exar even more. Just then, a soldier ran out of the forest and informed them that they had detected a signal to the northeast, in the Cerberus forest. The knight asked the young woman to stop, promising he wouldn't harm her. But Daeon didn't intend to believe a single word he said. After so many falls, the protagonist's leg was covered in scratches. The knight looked with pity at the girl's wounds, not understanding her desperate flight. But she has nowhere left to run. Dawn is surrounded, and in this state, she won't get far. So the young woman must accept her defeat. Blood flowed from the beauty's wounds, so she needs to be bandaged. As soon as the knight took a step forward, Dawn ran off. The man ran after her to stop her. He managed without much difficulty. The knight encircled her with one arm and pulled her towards him. With her last strength, Dawn tried to break free. Her stony face was no longer so. It seemed the young woman was about to cry from despair, and the knight noticed it. Showing doubt on his face, Daeon, in a soft voice, begged him to let her go, and then repeatedly said how much she hated them. With a precise blow to the base of the neck, the knight managed to render the beautiful brunette unconscious. Her body slumped, but the knight managed to catch her. Taking the heroine in his arms, he looked at her sadly. Just at that moment, Count Malhut appeared, who immediately jumped off his horse. He carefully observed his subordinate with the girl in his arms. And then, without hesitation, he walked towards him. Exar took the young woman in his arms and pressed her fragile body against his strong and toned torso. Noticing his subordinate's gaze, the count demanded that he dare not look at him like that. Usually for this, he would cut off his head, but this time, Exar agreed to forgive him. Although if it happens again, the knight will die. The soldier shuddered at the count's icy tone. He understood that his lordship had guessed everything. A little earlier, Secretary Jeffar had ordered the girl killed by any means. But the lord prevented it. That beautiful woman is too dangerous for the lord. A part of the protagonist's childhood was spent in a hanging cage. One day, her master came to see her again and mockingly asked her how she liked the place. The girl did not answer the question. The aristocrat swore and asked her what she thought she was. The little one dared to reject him, even though he loved her so much. The aristocrat grabbed the mechanism's handle and pulled it. Just at that moment, Dawn felt the cage begin to fall, but she couldn't do anything. The private cell fell to the floor with a brutal crash. The man, like a wild beast, clung to the grate and with a smug smile, promised the girl that she would love him. He is clearly not human, people don't behave like that, and the protagonist wasn't going to talk to beasts. The aristocrat began to hastily open the grate's lock, and in a short time, the cell door opened. He mockingly told the little one that she could keep making it difficult for him, but today he would touch her. Daeon closed her eyes tightly because she did not want that to happen at all. The disgusting hand of an obese man reached out towards the innocent body, desiring to completely dominate it. In Daeon's mind echoed her mother's words, that she must survive at all costs. So, as soon as the aristocrat approached, the protagonist kicked the man's face with all her might. She managed to gain a few minutes to escape, because as soon as the fat man recovered, he ordered the guard to immediately capture the insolent one. Daeon had to run through the snow to hide, but she kept feeling that this man was catching up to her. And when the disgusting hand reached for the protagonist, Daeon desperately realized she did not want that at all. She suddenly opened her eyes, waking up from the nightmare in a huge, soft bed. Realizing it had only been a horrible dream, the protagonist felt immense relief. But happiness did not last forever, as a familiar voice asked if she had woken up yet. Turning her head, the protagonist noticed, next to her in bed, the enemy of the Dalbury family, Count Exar Malhut. Resting his head on his hand, the man carefully examined the face of the young woman who had just woken up. But suddenly, a treacherous smile appeared on his lips. However, the brunette did not react again at all. The count thoughtfully commented that usually girls scream or blush shyly, but she doesn't react at all. Perhaps she simply hasn't made up her mind yet. But Daeon didn't reply anything to that. Exar decided to tell the runaway, who constantly repeated in her sleep that she was in great pain, like a dying chick, in a soft and weak voice. Only now did the young woman notice that her legs were bandaged. Not believing her eyes, Daeon jumped out of bed to make sure, losing her guard. And she didn't notice how the count's hand was approaching her. The handsome man gently laid the young woman back on the bed and hovered over her, leaning on one hand and holding the other. Even now, her face remained expressionless. This brought a smile to the blonde's lips. The protagonist tensed as soon as the man slowly started approaching her face. She tried to break free, but he held her tightly and wouldn't let go. And then, against her will, he touched her lips. The kiss didn't last long, as the young woman managed to push Count Malhut away from her. While processing what was happening, the brunette got up and ran out. The man threw his hair back and muttered something under his breath. The runaway's behavior was very curious, which increased Exar's interest. Meanwhile, Daeon ran to the bedside table and reached for the dagger. This did not impress the Count, who indifferently asked what she intended to do with it. The young woman's gaze was determined, and she firmly held the dagger pointing at the aristocrat. Exar slapped his side and asked her to come closer, as the strength difference was obvious. Even if the bunny grows claws, it won't beat the wolf. But then the girl changed the direction of the blade. Now the blonde couldn't help but react. The commoner placed the dagger against her own throat. Exar approached the girl and mockingly asked if she planned to commit suicide. But the answer was no, as Daeon intended to survive at all costs. However, in that case, she should point the dagger at the blonde man if she intends to fulfill her plan. Daeon understood. The aristocrat does not want her dead, so he will back down, and she will be able to live one more day. The Count paused thoughtfully. Is it a bluff, or is the girl serious now? The protagonist became alert when the man brought a chair closer, but she didn't remove the dagger. Showing her resolve, Exar asked if she loved Alvin. He was important to her, the heroine replied. Then, in that case, the man can take her innocence. But the protagonist firmly replied that she does not intend to sleep in the same bed with a man she does not love. This made Exar let out a laugh. His pride was wounded. He begged that he not tell Jeffar about this, or he would mock him. Exar's expression at that moment was one of pure satisfaction. He decided to ignore it and asked what they would do now, because he still desired her. Daeon replied that she would continue working there, so she asked him to treat her like a slave. Instead of delicious food, expensive clothes, and jewelry, she only wanted to work day and night as a servant, and Daeon remained firm in her decision. The man smiled maliciously and accepted the game. Now the brunette can do whatever she wants and is free to decide, and Exar will do as he pleases. As for the rules, it will be simple. Raising a finger, the blonde man announced that there would only be one. Daeon frowned slightly and asked what it would be about. Exar rejoiced, as he managed to interest the young woman, but he didn't show it. He replied that she would not leave the walls of this castle. If the girl disappears from his sight, dead or alive, they will have no right to anything until their wishes are fulfilled. Silence was taken as a yes, and Exar asked his servant to clean her room and to prepare something for dinner. Only she would sleep in that room. Immediately after, Count Malhut left, leaving the girl alone. The protagonist couldn't believe that he gave up so easily and didn't insist on spending the night together. But Daeon knew very well that she couldn't trust him, so she couldn't let her guard down. The next morning, the protagonist was making the Count's bed. Just at that moment, a half-naked man with a towel around his hips walked in, and he walked over to the wash basin. His figure was magnificent. His beautiful and toned body could attract the attention of any girl. But through the reflection in the mirror, Exar noticed that Dawn was not reacting to him at all. This created tension between them. The brunette approached the Count and handed him a white, spotless towel. The man took it and commented that it seemed she had already gotten used to this job. But Dawn didn't react and remained standing with her gaze lowered. The girl has been working like this for a long time, so Exar assumed that the old Dalberry and Alvin slept with her, and that downward gaze is like she isn't paying attention to him. A slave's habit on such a beautiful body. Exar approached and lifted his servant's chin, forcing her to look him directly in the eyes. Tilting his head to the side, he asked how her legs were, but the young woman didn't respond again. And that stubborn attitude began to greatly irritate Exar. He pulled the girl towards him and kissed her insistently. Next time, the man demanded that she answer if he asked something. And if Daeon wanted to ask him something, the great Count promised to answer any question that interested him. Now this can be considered a new rule. Exar begged the girl to try to remember it, because if she didn't, he would kiss her again. The protagonist, in an indifferent tone, reminded him that he had already said he wouldn't touch her. But it wasn't like that, because Exar did not intend to take advantage of her without her permission. But kisses didn't count. The Count threw the door open and called Sephar. The secretary interrupted his work and assumed that the Lord had finally gone to inspect the surroundings. Exar nodded and informed him that Orang was not as rich a land as he thought. There are no mines to make easy money, and the local soil is completely useless for agriculture. The Count conquered these lands just to see how the king would react, but he didn't even imagine that the land would be so poor. Sephar informed his lord that he had received a letter from Prince Sak, who wishes to come celebrate the conquest of Orang. They now have a week, and by then they must get rid of all the useless people. Just at that moment, a knight entered the room with another report. He handed the report to the count. After reading the content, Exar's face showed indignation. The man found out everything his runaway had done in a single day. Exar was indignant to learn that this girl gets up every day at 3 in the morning. He couldn't believe it. From 3:30, Daeon cleans the garden. From 4:30 to 5, the kitchen. And after cooking, she cleans the castle. And all that in 2 hours. After washing the laundry and having lunch, the girl washes the dishes, then dinner and the dishes again, and then cleaning the kitchen. She spends the rest of the time in her room sewing. Once, for a ball, she even decorated the second wife's dress with embroidery. Exar irritably asked if at least someone in the castle helped her. He asked the soldier how long the young woman had been working at such a hard pace. The man replied that probably for a long time. Then the count became interested in whether Daeon even exists. Scratching the back of his neck, the knight reported that several times he observed that this slave had lunch. Just at that moment, they knocked on the door. Exar immediately understood that Daeon was coming with food and allowed entry. There is no point in asking her if she eats well. If she ate well, she wouldn't be so thin. Although Daeon is a slave, she could very well be the mistress of Dalbury and Elvin, but they decided not to reveal anything about it. Foolish men do not meddle in women's affairs. And here someone was kind to her for the first time, so she took him out of love. Even if there is silence at home, she finds no peace. If only the culprits intervened, everything could be solved. They thought it was best to ignore everything, but the problems only increased. In the end, Daeon had it even harder. Shefar was open-mouthed when the master offered the slave a seat. The brunette did not resist and sat on the armchair opposite. Then she took a knife and began slicing the apple into small, perfect slices, so that his lordship could snack on something. Exar approached that femme fatale, took one of the slices she had just cut, and then brought it to the young woman's lips and asked her to open her mouth. With the intention of feeding Daeon, the man asked her not to forget their game, as he loved watching the movement of feminine lips. Daeon did not resist and opened her mouth wide, after which Count Malhut put a piece of apple in it. At that moment, the girl's appearance was simply gorgeous. Afterwards, Exar spread jam on bread. Daeon looked at him skeptically, still chewing the apple. Then the man brought the bread to her mouth, and the girl opened her mouth. Dawn had jam on her lips, so the brunette licked the remnants with a circular motion. Exar watched attentively, thinking that this femme fatale was provoking him on purpose. He asked that starting tomorrow, they bring him more meat. He wanted to see how the juice dripped down those beautiful lips. An irritated secretary interrupted his master's thoughts and showed him the next day's work. At that precise moment, Daeon silently got up from her seat and then left the room. Jeffar didn't understand why his master wasn't stopping her. She is not easy to stop, the count replied. In a serious tone, the secretary reported that this woman was dangerous, so his master should not give in to her charms. Hearing this, a cunning smile appeared on Exar's lips. He decided to reveal something to his secretary. That same night, Count Malhut called Daeon to give her a jewel, but the woman looked at him with indifference. Because of this, the man assumed she didn't like the gift. In the jewelry box was a gold bracelet with precious stones inlaid around it, which shone beautifully under the light. Daeon replied that something like that wouldn't suit her, and besides, she had nowhere to wear anything similar. The blonde asked about the ball, to which the young woman replied that she did not attend them. Smiling and adjusting his cuff, the man replied that, in that case, he would go there this year. But Daeon remained firm in her decision, so she added that she had nowhere to keep such a thing. The blonde irritably asked if Alvin and old Dalbury hadn't given their mistress any gifts. Ignoring the question, the slave bowed her head and replied that she had to leave. The ladies of the royal palace would scratch their eyes out for such a gift, and she rejected it as if it were just a small pebble. So she is one of those who aren't interested in expensive jewelry. Exar began to think what might please her then. A sly smile appeared on his lips, and he firmly decided that, little by little, he would make that woman his. Sooner or later, Daeon will give in to his insistence. He still has plenty of time, as the game has only just begun. The next morning, the count learned that in Daeon's room they had found the ring of the late second wife of Count Dalbury. According to the head maid, things belonging to many people constantly disappeared, and everything that was lost was found in Daeon's room. Today, in the second wife's room, things disappeared again, specifically gold rings. which were again found in Daon's room. Exar ordered his secretary to gather everyone working in the castle. Jeffrey especially questioned the maids and the rest of the staff, but everyone said the same thing. The thefts were constant, and Daon's name always came up. The Count's gaze hardened upon hearing this. All the servants were already gathered in the throne room. Exar sat in his place and observed everyone present closely. Normally, such an incident is resolved according to the castle laws, so the Count asked the head maid how the late Count Dalbury would have handled this situation. Apparently, previously they were whipped and had their wrists cut, but the Count abolished these punishments, so now there is another way. They lock the person in solitary confinement and do not feed them, but still this slave kept stealing. Therefore, the head maid begged the lord to choose a harsher punishment this time. The Count revealed that the night before, Daon had rejected a bracelet worth a fortune in gold coins, but now, the servants claim she stole petty silver trinkets of negligible value. Daon remained silent, even in this situation, as if she didn't care what happened. A triumphant smile appeared on the head maid's face upon hearing that the thief's hands would be cut off. The Count frowned, observing the head maid's reaction and realizing that no one would defend Daon. Just yesterday evening, Exar had brought up this topic. He explained to the secretary that it wasn't that Daon was inexpressive, but that she controlled herself perfectly. Exar himself would not consider such a person dangerous, but the secretary insisted that, for the master, this particular girl was extremely dangerous. But still, Count Malhut never ran from danger. Many hate Daon, so Exar was sure that someone would soon want to stab her in the back. Returning to the present, the Count ordered the slave to explain herself. Now the young woman has a chance, if she doesn't prefer to lose her head. Dawn remained silent, surely thinking that whatever she said, nothing would change, since no one would believe a foreign slave. The blonde coldly asked if she perhaps wished to die. She only needs to say one word now. After this, the brunette firmly stated that she had never stolen anything, that she didn't need jewelry. Exar severely ordered the young woman to approach him. The protagonist did not resist and approached the Count. She did not accept the aristocrat's hand, so he himself approached her wrist. Daon was stunned and opened her eyes in surprise when the man suddenly sat her on his lap. And then he put his hand on her shoulder and pulled her towards him. He ordered everyone to watch closely and remember well that Daon is his woman. Everything inside this castle belongs to her. Therefore, Dawn has the right to steal whatever she desires, and this is not a crime. But since all the servants are gathered today, the Count will take the opportunity to announce something. From the housekeeper to the common servants, theft and bribery flourished here. Rob opened the document and read. In Phaeton, paid 3 silver coins to the housekeeper to be hired. Then, he himself paid 2 silver coins to Hans and was exempted from paying taxes. Hans also received coins from the cook. Often, when hiring new servants, people gave livestock or grain to be hired. The head chef changed suppliers frequently. In turn, the suppliers personally paid him with gold coins or flour. And so, Rob revealed the entire list. The Count was extremely pleased and remembered that they had talked about punishment before. The head maid revealed that criminals were beaten and had their wrists cut. The servants fell to their knees, begging the master for forgiveness, saying how sorry they were. Some said their life had been hard, others that they simply had no choice. The Count announced that the taxation system would change. Now it would be paid per person, not per village. Another objective of the census is to determine how many men can serve as soldiers. Suddenly, the Count ordered all those whose names were on the list to be beheaded. The servants begged the master even more to take pity, promising it wouldn't happen again. Just at that moment, Daon begged the Count not to do it. After thinking about it, the Count saw a good opportunity to improve Daon's reputation among the servants. Therefore, Exar said sternly, "We must have no mercy on these people." But Daon firmly stated that Count Dalbury had died recently, as had his wife, and their young lord. The inhabitants of Orank already feel uneasy about the sudden changes, and if the Count acts like this, they will begin to fear him. Exar reported that the servants themselves said that criminals deserve punishment, to which the girl replied that the locals might turn against him. The blonde explained that they will simply execute the servants who broke the law, which will only benefit the locals. The problem is that Orang is a small territory. Many of the servants here have families outside the castle walls, so what happened will become known. It will all look as if the invaders have arrived at the castle and imposed their own rules. The Count frowned, as he perfectly understood that the girl was right. He had finally managed to understand the temperament of this femme fatale. Apparently, Daeon liked politics. If Exar executes the criminals, this woman will continue to hide her feelings and live her life. But if he lets them live, he can move Daeon on the chessboard. The man perfectly understood that it would be much easier if they simply executed them all. They can be exiled, but that wouldn't solve the second problem, as they desperately need labor now. Therefore, the following decision was made. The men will work on repairing the castle and the roads, and the women will work in the taverns near the construction sites. Exar gently touched Dawn's chin and asked her what she liked to do in her free time. The girl replied without hesitation that she liked to cook. The Count informed her that, in that case, starting today she would be responsible for the kitchen. Therefore, the girl must remember that she now has only one job. She will do nothing else. Still, Exard decided to ask something. If the culprits were exiled or executed, there wouldn't be enough servants for her. Daeon replied to the Count that his census omitted too much, that he should broaden the criteria and consider the rest. For example, the number of people over 15 years old, the number of children who can work, and things like that. Then select suitable servants and pay them a weekly wage. Also, give them the opportunity to earn extra. The heroine's idea was good, so Exar decided to do it, something the slave did not expect at all. Surprise was drawn on her face. Undoubtedly, this girl likes politics. That's why she is indifferent to jewelry. If she is given the opportunity to prove her worth, maybe she can be used. The man approached Dawn and reminded her in a whisper that she said she would only open the doors to the ruler. Now she knew how to open her doors. The next day, Jeffar tried to explain to the Lord that building a road is a lot of work. It's not too late, we can give up on this. It was obvious that good roads would make life easier for both the locals and them. So the Count asked the secretary why he was opposing it so much. He himself had seen what was happening outside, hadn't he? Jeffar thought that, although this territory belongs to them now, they are outsiders here. And the roads require maintenance. It's too proactive a government. Not only the king, but others could also start fearing a threat from them. And their fears in the future could turn into conflicts. However, Exar interrupted his secretary's rant. He explained that building roads is simply a way to kill time. To which Jeffar replied that they are already cutting the number of soldiers, so as not to provoke the king. The secretary was sure that the Lord was behaving this way because of the influence of that woman. So he reported that he had new information about Daeon, which His Holiness would be interested to know. It seems Daeon was trying to convince Alvin to run away. In other words, they wanted to do it together on the day of Count Dalberry's death. Upon hearing this, Exar couldn't help but let out an irritated chuckle that escaped his lips. While everyone was mourning, this woman was plotting. Moreover, she told everyone that there was a high probability that Exar's army would invade Orank. As soon as the Count died, she predicted the invasion and wanted to flee with the eldest son. So she is definitely an unusual woman. However, they did not flee, as Daeon did not know what the second wife would be capable of. And that's why she decided to stay. If they were in a romantic relationship, one could understand the young woman. This woman is dangerous and capable, and she can read her opponent. Exar agreed, as Daeon was indeed cold and intelligent. But Shefar reminded him that she was still a slave. Slaves are worth no more than cattle, so this girl cannot be a concubine. She cannot even be a mistress, according to the law. Exar's gaze hardened, and he coldly asked, so what? Until now, Sephar respected his lord's wishes, but now he had to avoid his mistake. He recounted that 5 months ago, the second son of Baron Bendel was executed for an affair with a slave. His head still hangs at the castle gates. The lord has many enemies, more than anyone. If he lets his guard down, this girl will stab him, as she hates him for executing Alvin. And what if she falls into the hands of another lord? Getting rid of her now is the sensible thing to do. The Count perfectly understood what the secretary meant. Just at that moment, he saw Daeon leaving the castle. The young woman was working again, as if she couldn't stand still, which made anger start boiling inside Exar. Apparently, this woman was naturally stupid. Jeffar sighed tiredly and concluded that his lord could not simply give up that girl. With a slight smile, the man replied that she would belong only to him. Daeon headed to the kitchen. At the entrance, she noticed Count Malhut, who was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. The man reminded her that he had already told her not to leave the castle walls, but she was still going somewhere. The slave explained that there wasn't enough food at the construction site, so she just wanted to take it there. Exar approached the young woman and told her that this job wasn't for her, that there was no point in doing it. If you take someone else's job, you are interfering in their life. As soon as Daeon reaches a certain position, she will have to get used to using people. That's why the Count says this for the good of the girl and his subordinates. Silence fell. The Count awaited a response from the young woman, and Daeon weighed his words. The man turned around, and the protagonist replied affirmatively. Count Malhut decided to rest a little and lay down on the hay bales. Looking at the young woman, he silently beckoned her towards him with a hand gesture. Daeon couldn't resist, so she approached the man, and he gently took her hand. But then his hand moved towards the brunette's wrist and pulled her towards him. The young slave woman had to sit down as the Count stood up, still staring intently at her. She still showed no reaction, which made Exar frown, and his gaze became severe. The Count abruptly placed his hands on the runaway's waist and pulled her towards him. And then, surprisingly, he hugged her. The man concluded that this woman was like strong liquor. The more you drink, the more you desire it. This drink was intoxicating. Therefore, Exar absolutely did not want to let go of that fragile body in his arms. The beauty froze when the man started to act. Not expecting such audacity, he laid her down on the soft hay and hovered over her, touching her thigh with one hand and looking intently into her eyes. Daeon did not look away and continued to stare with a stony expression, as if feeling nothing. If the girl doesn't like it, she can say so. But now she was silent. Daeon could at least try to get angry, but her emotions were under control. The brunette remained silent, so the Count assumed she liked what was happening between them. Therefore, he suggested moving forward, awaiting her reaction and next moves. Even after those words, the heroine's face expressed nothing, cold and indifferent. The man cursed mentally, because if you keep your distance, she's quiet, and if you get closer, she's quiet too. It was probably a habit she developed when she was a slave and learned to protect herself. No matter who is in front of you, it's best to remain silent to protect your heart from pain. Daeon tries to protect her heart at all costs, which means she is now closed off to Exar. The Count unfastened a button on his dark red cloak and looked at the girl with interest. Daeon was surprised when he suggested playing chess and asked about her skills. The young woman nodded, and the man suggested playing a game after dinner in a cozy room. If she wins, Exar promised to listen to her wishes and try to fulfill them in the future. For example, this could be total freedom of action. But the heroine is not interested in freedom because every slave dies as such. It's better to stay here now. It is logical and wise on her part to serve a master who treats her well and cares about her. Moreover, Dawn perfectly understands that she attracts men, so she tries to maintain an expressionless look. The Count couldn't understand when she completely gave up her emotions and feelings. Daeon asked her lord what he really desired. The man cheerfully replied that he just wanted the opportunity to kiss her at any moment. Of course, he can do it whenever he wants, but he will lose their chess match. The man pushed a lock of hair away from Daeon, but she rejected his hand with disgust. She agreed to play on the condition that he would not use that ability, that he would not touch her at all. Exar smiled maliciously and agreed. Tonight they would play a fascinating game between the two of them. In the first game, the Count won, and now he must sign the permission for a kiss. He wanted to add a point about intimacy permission, but she asked him not to write that extra word. Exar cursed mentally and crossed out the leftover word, understanding her desire to maintain distance. Now it is the slave's turn to sign the permission for a kiss, so that they can continue the game. Being able to read and write is a privilege of aristocrats, and not even all of them. Since when do slaves learn that? If they find out, they could punish Daeon, but still, she corrected him with certainty in her voice. It is a serious crime to show your reading and writing skills in front of him, especially letters from aristocrats. As soon as Daeon signed the paper, the Count already wanted to use that permission to kiss her without hesitation. He put a foot on the table and pulled her face to fulfill his dream of kissing the dark-haired girl. But that same night, he learned that the girl had disappeared again and no one knew her whereabouts. The maid told that, according to Daeon, she was supposed to prepare soup the next day, but she suddenly disappeared. It is already 10 p.m. Everyone should be asleep, so the Count began to think about the reasons for her escape. But he knew that the girl wasn't stupid. She always found a way to avoid trouble in the castle. The maid told the lord that the young woman had already left before, at late hours. Without giving any explanation, approximately every 3 or 4 days, Dawn would leave the castle in the middle of the night. The servants murmured about secret meetings with the count or another man, but it was also rumored that she was a spy for another lord and fulfilled her missions inside this castle. When the slave returns, her clothes are soaked with rain or sweat, her hair disheveled by the wind, and her face red from excitement or tiredness. That's why many thought she had intimate encounters with someone in the forest or somewhere far from the master's eyes. And the castle servants, Exar remembered the instant he leaned in to kiss her. The young woman offered no resistance, preparing to accept the inevitable, but the man did not touch her lips, remaining suspended inches from them. And then, abruptly, he pulled the protagonist towards him. He knocked her onto the table and hovered over her. Exar's brow furrowed, and in a clearly displeased tone, he ordered the girl to open her mouth. The man asked if perhaps she preferred intimacy instead of a kiss. Suddenly, Daeon firmly declared that the permission would last only as long as their lips touched. That is, just once. Exar smiled slyly and accepted that condition. Immediately after, he pressed his lips against the young woman's. As soon as she felt the man's hand on her thigh, Dawn interrupted the kiss and turned away. The girl reminded the man that they had only agreed on one kiss. However, Exar was satisfied, as today he had managed to advance a little further. That same night, the maid told the lord that the young woman had disappeared and would probably return wet by dawn. The next day, they played chess again, but the idea that Dawn might have another man tormented him. Considering the brunette's beauty, it was quite possible, but the mere thought that she could have someone else made the count's blood boil with rage. This time, victory went to Dawn. She could take advantage of a wish, so she asked the count to enact a law where all trash would be thrown into a single place. Of course, Exar knew that she wouldn't ask for jewelry or anything like that, but this is even more unexpected. The girl explained that in densely populated cities, women give birth surrounded by trash. Children play with the trash and eat it, and tired men after work sleep in the trash. The environment influences the mind and education. So no matter how you look at it, a person who lives their entire life as a slave cannot think like this. And that means Daeon could have someone. For example, that person she meets in the forest. The brunette began to explain in more detail that every summer trash accumulates and is the main cause of illness. But Exar replied indifferently that it is difficult to control that, so no one will follow this law just like that. However, the protagonist only asked that dead livestock not be thrown into the river that people use. But if the brunette proposed introducing such laws, she had to give reasons why this would be beneficial for the people. Dawn recounted that in summer many people die from illnesses, but in winter even more from hunger. That's why they need to reduce the number of deaths in summer. This way they will have more labor, there will be more farmers, and therefore they can increase the harvest. However, the commoners don't even understand what trash is and what isn't. How does Dawn plan to explain this to them? It turns out it's simple. It's enough to think this way. If it can be used again, then it is not trash. The answer was quite direct, and the count was even surprised that the girl could argue with him. The heroine watched the aristocrat's reaction closely and asked if perhaps he wouldn't be capable. Those words and that tone touched the man's pride. Now Exar understood. The girl from the beginning planned to use their game for her own purposes. Rob asked the count's secretary to explain what exactly is happening with the trash accumulating in the castle. They are all busy building roads, but the lord wants to fit something else into his tight schedule. Shefar replied that they already have a warehouse prepared and that all the equipment will arrive tomorrow, and the necessary materials. The problem is that they are already short of labor. So Rob doesn't get what the hell his lordship is thinking. The secretary, annoyed, blurted out that he wants to approve a law to concentrate trash in one place. The knights have just finished the census, and now they have to distribute more land among families with abundant labor. Before, all the land belonged to the count, but now it will be in the hands of farmers who can cultivate it. It was decided that farmers pay the count a part of the harvest as taxes to maintain the region's economy. Rob asked, "It can't be that all of this is happening because of that woman, can it?" Jeffar, with a touch of sadness, replied that who knows, maybe yes, but no one can say for sure. For now, the count's people are silent, but Runno is clearly interested in that beauty, and he doesn't take his eyes off her. When Daeon fled, Runno, his lord's loyal and trustworthy knight, was the first to find her in the forest. Every time the commoner passes near him, Runno lowers his gaze. As if ashamed of his interest in her, Rob decided to ask the count's secretary if they should kill that girl, if she really poses a danger to them. If Jafar believes this woman can harm the Lord, he only needs to say one word, and Dayan will disappear instantly. In the Lord's office, the secretary noticed several papers with a signature. The permissions to kiss were few, of course, but Exar was happy even for that amount, as it was a step forward towards his goal. He asked his secretary if he was busy that night, and the man replied that he was not. In that case, Jafar will go with him tonight. He did not object. He only asked if the girl would give the Count a special favor for 10 kiss permissions. Exar approved Jafar's idea, and only then did the secretary realize he had spoken too much. Night fell, but Jafar begged all the gods that the girl would not leave the castle today and stay inside. However, his hopes faded. Soon Dayan left the structure without any explanation of her actions or intentions. The Count, following her with astonishment, was stunned to see where the girl was heading and what she planned to do now. This eccentric woman decided to bathe in the lake despite the weather. Something quite unusual, by the way. As soon as she started undressing, Exar gave his secretary a threatening look, and Jafar instantly turned away. From a distance, the Count heard the girl humming a melody from a distant land, probably a song from her homeland, full of nostalgia. It seems Dayan is really in a good mood. She is even smiling, something the Count had never noticed in her before. The constellation of Capricorn became visible in the starry sky, and that means it will soon get cold. At this rate, it's easy to catch a cold. All this time, Jafar had a bad feeling. Dawn, like a poisonous flower, is beautiful and attractive, but with her insane beauty, she kills the men around her. Rob's doubt about whether he should eliminate that woman resonated in the secretary's mind. The next day, playing chess, the Count asked if people were already throwing trash correctly. Dawn nodded. The Count knew that pleasant feeling of seeing his law being followed. One change leads to another, so the girl will try her best to win at chess. Because she surely has things and situations, she wants to change in her life to improve it. Exar won again and proposed to the girl to have fun, showing kiss permissions with a smile. The man recounted that he always bathed at the same time to maintain his daily routine. The bathtub must be ready by 10 p.m., so they heat the water at 9:30 until he enters the bathroom. Dayan will be there for those 30 minutes, waiting for him and relaxing. The young woman looked at the Count skeptically and asked him curiously why he needed that. Exard replied that it was just a small game, as he was not going to break his promise to touch her body. But the man would be happy if Dayan wanted to join and carefully wash every corner of his body. However, now Exar just wants the bathtub to absorb her scent. Of course, if the girl refuses, she doesn't have to. But Dayan accepted the Count's proposition. From that day on, the Count ordered that she bathe in front of him every time he was nearby. In the bathtub, she could relax and forget her worries for a moment, enjoying the warmth of the water. And little by little the weight on her shoulders lessened, and Exar was the only one in the world who could give such a life to a slave. The man sincerely hoped that she was grateful for those moments of peace and relaxation that he provided. And the man felt that he was beginning to understand the girl and her complicated inner world, and her worries. Therefore, when he heard that she had disappeared, Exar took into account that everyone always misunderstood her. But this time, Dayan didn't even return after midnight, which greatly worried Exar for her safety. Sephar firmly stated that he had nothing to do with it and was not connected to Dayan's disappearance. The secretary didn't understand why his master thought this way, since from the beginning, Dayan was a woman who could not be trusted. To which the Count replied, the slave perfectly understands that it is in her best interest to be with him, so she has no reason to run away. This greatly outraged Zephyr, and he shouted that his lord had become completely obsessed with that woman. Exar shouted in response, so what if he has? He is not going to change his mind and will do what he deems right. If God asked him to choose between the country and the woman, he would not hesitate to choose the woman, since she is the most important thing to him. Because in his heart, she occupies a special place, and he cannot ignore it. The Count reminded Zephyr that he had appointed him his secretary when he was just a beaten child. But the assistant thought they were completely different people. He was sure that if the master kept that woman close, she would lead him to total ruin. Exar replied that if Zephyr didn't like his decision, he could leave right now and never return. After those harsh words, the room fell silent, and both men thought about how everything would continue. Jafar tiredly asked the master if he had really fallen in love with that woman and would risk everything for her. But the Count still didn't understand his feelings, so he needed time to understand his emotions and desires. But the more the secretary tells him to abandon that woman, the more he desires her, and he cannot get rid of that feeling. At that precise moment, a knight burst into the room and reported that they had found the woman in the stable. All this time she was in the castle, hiding from everyone and trying to avoid attracting attention. Entering the stable, the count found Daeon's fragile body sleeping, and his heart filled with distress for her health. Exar felt relief knowing she hadn't escaped, but then concern flooded him. Fearing she was unwell, the count ordered an announcement that he values everyone's effort, so tomorrow there will be meat and alcohol to celebrate. Perhaps they didn't deserve such a reward for searching for a simple slave, but they ran all night after that woman without rest. Their fatigue will turn into anger, directed towards Dawn. Exar ordered Sephar not to let anyone approach Daeon, and asked for a thick blanket and a hot stone wrapped in cloth. Daeon clearly had a high fever and was drenched in sweat. The girl huddled away from everyone, lying in a spot where she clearly wanted to be alone for a while. The count moved her to his lap and asked with a smile if she had arrived from the moon. Soon the secretary brought everything his lord had requested. The man put a hot stone in the girl's hand and sought the blanket, wanting to care for the sick woman and do everything for her comfort. Thus they sat in silence for a while. Exar still didn't dare to mention that he lost his father at age 12 and was granted the title of very young lord. Therefore, it seemed unfair to him that people had to survive in different conditions, with different rules. Daeon listened to everything and replied that slaves have no rights and must obey their masters' will without freedom. But Exar is a count with many rights, although that doesn't mean he is content, and he wants to change the situation. However, she doesn't have to fight the whole world, as Daeon can earn her rights if she insists enough, so she only has to fight against him, not against the others. If Dawn feels bad, she can say so, because to deserve freedom, you don't need to lie or hide your true feelings. The count promised to change her, so that Daeon becomes a complete person, capable of showing her emotions. Hearing this, the girl looked away and replied that she hated him for trying to change her usual life. But Exar already knew that feeling. That's why he prefers to see her angry face rather than a smile or joy. He could take her by force, of course, but he longed for Daeon to desire him and come to him of her own free will. But Daeon didn't intend to sleep with a man she didn't love. Therefore, the count planned to make her fall in love, to desire to be by his side for herself. In just a few days, Exar had already obtained 12 permissions from Daeon to kiss her. He wanted to accumulate more permissions, but he couldn't wait any longer, so he asked Daeon to sit closer. As soon as she did, he encircled her waist, drawing her towards him, feeling her warmth, and longing to be closer. The crucial thing was not to let go of her lips, so Exar, with a cunning smile, warned her that every kiss would be very long. And then, his lips covered the slave's lips. This time, Exar would not hold back, deepening the kiss immediately, using his tongue to show his passion for her. Then, his lips moved to the young woman's ear, where he breathed softly and whispered words of affection, seeking to awaken her feelings. The girl stopped him and reminded him that he could only kiss her, but she didn't specify that he could only kiss her on the lips. So the man's lips moved to the young woman's neck, making her shudder from the unexpected touch and tenderness. Then he kissed her lips again, trying to satiate himself with Daeon, but it was impossible, and his desire only grew. His hand slowly slid towards the heroine's vest and unfastened a few top buttons. Soon the girl was without it. Daeon's gaze tensed, and she looked at the count suspiciously, not understanding his intentions. The man leaned closer and kissed her forehead. He desired to touch the girl's chest, but she did not allow it, placing her hand over his. Once again, Dawn reminded him that he could only use the kiss. The blonde remembered it perfectly, but his desires were stronger than ever, and he did not intend to stop. So, suddenly, he laid the young woman on the table and pressed his lips to her stomach. He ran his tongue over her small mole, giving her chills. Then his hand slowly slid up the feminine thighs. But Dawn abruptly stopped him, not wanting to continue. The count, with a cunning smile, asked the young woman not to worry, as he was not going to go too far. Dawn was scared. She didn't understand if Exar was being honest with her. Usually she is always cold, but now she is nervous. For today, that is all the blonde could do, and he felt he should stop. The man didn't want Daeon to hate him even more. When she makes that face, the count feels pity. Daeon was stunned when the man leaned closer and briefly kissed her forehead. The count pulled away, and the girl looked at him amazed, still not believing what is happening between them now. Exar didn't really like short kisses, but now it is necessary so as not to scare her. But suddenly, he felt an irresistible urge to bury himself in her, so the man decided to kiss Daeon's stomach one last time, for today. However, he couldn't stop there, and his tongue slid down to the girl's knee, causing unexpected sensations. Daeon failed to contain a moan that escaped her lips upon feeling his touch. Exar froze, looking at the girl with surprise. The slave, instantly, blushed intensely with shame. She covered her mouth with her hand and looked away, unable to face the Count. The little that remained of Exar's self-control began to fade, and he leaned over the girl again, anxious to continue what he had started. The man held the protagonist's nape and kissed her avidly, feeling a rush of emotions and passion towards her. Just then, someone burst into the room, interrupting the intimate atmosphere that had formed between them. Exar separated abruptly and covered the girl with the blanket, so the inopportune guest wouldn't see her in that state. Prince Zack explained that he had knocked, but no one had answered him. Count Malhut's gaze hardened, but he couldn't contradict his highness. Coldly, he asked the prince to leave. Zack asked if playing with women was fine, but receiving guests was inadmissible. Without saying anything, Exar pointed to his problem in his pants. The prince understood everything and didn't bother the aristocrat anymore, so he left the room. Dawn was also going to leave, but Exar stopped her, grabbing her wrist. He wanted to hand her the remaining used passes. After doing so, he himself left the room, needing time to process everything. The next morning the trumpet sounded. It meant that everything was ready for the hunt, and they had to gather to begin. The prince told Exar that the king will be confused upon learning he occupied Orang without permission. But if the blonde is ordered to leave Orang, he will do it, not wanting to enter into conflict with authority, although he will take the woman with him. Without a leader, this small territory will be consumed by war in less than a year, and it will be a catastrophe. This being the case, it is better to leave Exar here to rule. But his loyalty to the king is in doubt. Zack became curious about how that woman looks, so he hoped to see her at the party tonight. As soon as the prince left home, the count told his assistant that Zack probably came as a warning. In other words, they wanted to tell Exar that they would let it slide this time, but next time, the king would intervene in person. Someday they might order him to marry a princess, so now he needs proof of Daeon's beauty. At night, there was a grand banquet, where all the noble guests gathered to celebrate the important event. The beautiful Daeon appeared, dressed in expensive clothes, which enhanced her beauty and refined grace. Even His Highness was stunned by the girl's beauty, and a slight blush appeared on his cheeks out of admiration. Daeon's walk radiated lightness and femininity, making it impossible to look away and forget her presence. Now Zack understood why Exar was crazy, and so attached to this girl, with extraordinary charisma. Although now the blonde regretted dressing Daeon like this for tonight, as all the men were only looking at her. Suddenly, Viscount Sergak abruptly rose from his chair and shouted that she was his runaway slave, whom he had been searching for years. The count frowned and told the aristocrat that he had drunk too much and was not in a condition to reason sensibly. But Sergak was sure that it was the same slave who had escaped from him 7 years ago. According to the kingdom's laws, a slave is always the personal property of their master, until they are sold to another owner. This mysterious woman, the Viscount's slave, the servant can immediately bring the contract so that everyone can personally verify it. Then, the conceited man confidently advanced towards the beautiful woman and abruptly pulled her by her long hair. Exar jumped up from his seat. His furious eyes showed an undeniable will to kill that arrogant aristocrat. But the prince quickly stopped the count, because if the Viscount tells the truth, then that woman belongs to him. The blonde replied irritably that any contract, even the most official one, can easily be faked for personal gain. Sergak theatrically removed his elegant mask and showed the horrible burn scar that the young woman had left on him 7 years ago. Now Exar was absolutely clear that Daeon fled, because this conceited idiot has no idea how to treat women. Smiling smugly, the Viscount announced haughtily that near the slave's navel there is a small mole. The count's face contorted from internal tension, as he instantly realized that statement was pure truth. If the prince himself allows it now, they can immediately undress the girl so that all those present can verify it personally. The prince calmly reported that her true owner is now Exar, and the slave status is defined precisely by the owner. Exar irritably asked if the insolent Viscount truly believed he could do whatever he pleased. If that woman really belonged to him, Exar asked if the man was ready to stake his life at that instant. A shining, naked sword fell with a dull thud near the Viscount's feet, foreshadowing an imminent bloody end. But Sir Gok was not going to accept that unequal fight, so he shouted what was the point of contracts. If they could snatch away his legitimate property, Exar could no longer stand his pathetic behavior and resolutely moved towards the stupid idiot. Ready to tear him to pieces, the prince severely ordered the count to stop immediately, as he completely disapproved of such duels in his presence. Due to the serious situation, Zack felt a headache and proposed asking the very cause of all this commotion. The Viscount exclaimed happily that he had another irrefutable proof. That woman is mute. In 3 long years, she hadn't uttered a single word. Sir Gok didn't know that this intelligent girl used her silence as a very cunning way. An effective way to protect herself. The situation that forced Dawn into that silence must have been unbearably harsh. The Count's jaw visibly tightened as he imagined what that bastard might have done to Daeon. But showing his unbridled fury was counterproductive, so he took a deep breath. If the Viscount claimed with such certainty that his slave was mute, he was cruelly mistaken. Exar slowly approached the beaten girl and stood in front of her. He knew that when cornered, Daeon trusts no one and only wants to be left alone. The man gently touched the girl's beautiful face. Daeon, to everyone's surprise, calmly confirmed that it was the pure truth. After the luxurious gala dinner, the young woman retired to her chambers and returned to sewing in silence. Shortly after, the Count himself came to visit her. In reality, he was intrigued by what was wrong with that insolent Viscount. Exar wanted to understand everything. As soon as Daeon uttered her first words, the Viscount's weak arguments instantly collapsed. Then the young woman quietly revealed that, in her very tender childhood, she was sold to that terrible man. War had broken out in her country. Her mother told her to flee, so Daeon boarded a smuggler's ship. But there was a storm. When the girl was washed ashore, she was captured by pirates and sold to that Viscount. At that tragic moment, the young heroine had barely turned 10 years old. As soon as that unfortunate girl turned 13, she escaped, and in the forest, she met Count Dalberry himself. She had incredible luck that fate brought her together with him, as there would be no kinder aristocrat in the entire kingdom. Exar was curious why she fled her country alone, but he had to postpone that question for now. The young woman recounted that, precisely at that crucial moment, she completely abandoned all her feelings and emotions. The Count knelt before her on one knee. His gentle hand tenderly reached out towards the young woman's beautiful face, but she desperately begged him not to awaken her feelings, dormant for so long. But Exar flatly refused, as he desired to know her better so much that he saw no point in repressing his impulses. If the enigmatic Dawn is not constantly by his side, he simply won't be able to remain sane any longer. The man gently drew the fragile young woman towards him. Then he carefully covered her soft lips with his own. But Dawn instantly interrupted that unexpected kiss. If the great Count does not want her to disappear from his life forever, he must strictly respect the distance she asked for. The man smiled cunningly and completely unexpectedly for her, asked when her birthday was. Daeon thought about it deeply, but still gave her answer. She was born on November 27th. Exar confidently stood up and firmly promised to forever remember that important date. Then he said it was too cold in that small room, so she could live in the next room, next to his own. But Daeon gently rejected such a generous offer, stating that she was perfectly fine there. So the man decided to tell her that he had traveled a lot and acquired several souvenirs, even from the Orient. The young woman's gaze, at that very instant, became incredibly interested. Full of hidden curiosity, Exar carefully extended his strong hand, and with a smile asked if she found it so interesting now. The young woman gently took the hand he offered and replied in a low voice, but firmly, that she did. The man promised to organize an entire museum especially for her, but in return, she had to sleep in the new room tonight. Daeon finally agreed, and together they unhurriedly headed to the majestic castle. Jeffar reported that, as the master had predicted, that afternoon Viscount Surgok was wandering suspiciously near Daeon's room. For the absolute safety of fragile Daeon, the Count proposed immediately assigning her a knight as a personal bodyguard. They couldn't know for sure what to expect from the Viscount, so the most sensible thing was to cover their backs as much as possible. Jeffar was stunned when the Count unexpectedly proposed Runo as the main candidate. The loyal assistant thought it was best to name Rob, but Exar considered him too impulsive. The calm Rano would be ideal to protect Dawn. The following night, another gala dinner took place, overflowing with splendor and aristocratic conversations. Viscount Surgok was also present, enthusiastically enjoying his umpteenth mug of intoxicating drink. Suddenly, Count Tsar approached him determinedly, offering him an exquisite bottle of unknown wine. It seemed like a shamelessly ostentatious way to settle their tense relationship, showing reconciliation. However, all the guests watched them closely, and Viscount Surgok knew that refusing would infuriate the prince. So he accepted the drink offered by the count, and they toasted with a slight clinking of glasses. Following etiquette, Exar didn't even taste his drink. He leaned directly towards the Viscount. With a menacing growl, he ordered him not to dare touch his woman anymore. The Viscount exclaimed indignantly that she belonged to him by right. He would complain to the king. With a cold smile, Exar replied that this would be possible if the Viscount managed to return home. Surgok finally understood that the count might have added something dangerous and potent to his drink. The glass with the suspicious drink overturned onto the polished table, leaving a dark stain. And wet. With irony in his voice, Exar announced that apparently Viscount Surgok got drunk easily, perhaps due to his advanced age. Hearing this, fury instantly took over Surgok's face. Exar leaned menacingly towards the pale aristocrat again, promising to kill him someday. The Viscount could not answer coherently. He only said he urgently needed to change his clothes. The count sat calmly in his place and stared fixedly at where Surgok had been sitting just a moment ago. If he fully entrusted Daeon's safety to the loyal Rano, he wouldn't have to seriously worry. He would be calm, but the man remained uneasy, feeling an inexplicable anxiety for her fate. Because Surgok, unlike many other Viscounts, will not give up his obsession. After careful consideration, the man slowly but decisively stood up. Daeon, paying no attention to anything, lit a small fire to heat water in a large cauldron. Just then, Viscount Surgok, completely drunk, stumbled into the small room. With cloudy eyes, Rano silently but determinedly stood in his way, preventing him from advancing, which completely infuriated the arrogant aristocrat. He abruptly slapped the insolent knight in the face to let him know his place. Seeing this unexpected event, Dawn immediately asked her loyal bodyguard to step aside. But Rano was not going to allow it, and he protected the girl with his imposing body. Before seeing the exhausted maids, Dawn had kindly dismissed them. Drinking warm water alone after an exhausting day is an incomparable pleasure. Dawn asked for nothing more from life, only to grow old in peace and die quietly. But suddenly, Exar burst into her routine overwhelmingly. The girl couldn't predict the actions of this strong, cheerful, and fearsome man. Playing this game was fun. For the first time, she felt something so incredible. She also understood that in his powerful territory, she would be completely safe. Exar protects her, Daeon being a simple slave, and shows her respect. His kisses were as passionate as if he truly wanted to share his life. When Daeon first felt his burning lips, her heart stopped from emotion. But for the count, this could be just another game. She knew she wasn't the first to fall. She wanted to ask the loyal knight if his lord acted this way with all women. Carefully, but just at that moment, her worst and oldest nightmare burst into the room. And then Surgok, suddenly and with all his might, struck Rano right in the face. Dawn, worried, immediately asked the brave knight to step aside. But he flatly refused. The Viscount was furious, because the damned idiot was only pretending to be mute and wouldn't speak to him. He took such sincere care of her, showing his false kindness. And still, she dared to run away. The fat man stumbled for a moment upon seeing the cunning slave take a firm step towards him. The man immediately rejoiced, believing that she finally understood him and saw his mistakes. Surgok categorically demanded that she immediately return with him. After all, he found her. The Viscount, believing himself generous, benevolently declared that this time he would forgive her insolence. Daeon suddenly understood clearly. He was still trapped in his cruel and horrible obsession. She desperately wanted to leave behind, once and for all, the terrible past that bound her to him. The Viscount cheerfully proposed leaving the castle that very night. Without delay, he would have to thank noble Exar later for diligently protecting his possession from intruders. Hearing the slave's weak steps behind him, Rano desperately begged her to stop. His voice trembled. At that unusual and pained tone, Daeon froze and looked surprised at the brave knight, not understanding his reaction. Meanwhile, Rano furiously looked at the disgusting Viscount and firmly demanded that he leave there. Before it was too late, the knight's behavior completely enraged Surgok, and the man shouted that he had no right to touch a loyal servant of the king. In the midst of this fierce argument, Daeon cleverly took a sharp knife from the table, without anyone noticing, and instantly hid it behind her back. Then she calmly approached her brave bodyguard, and without showing any emotion, she told him she had already made a decision. Under the cloak of night, the heroes tried to escape the castle, with unshakable determination. Viscount Surgok was dragging the girl by the arm, not imagining that his end could come right there, at that instant. However, the brunette's bold plans were interrupted by a powerful male hand that skillfully intercepted hers. Immediately after, the man pulled the young woman towards him with unexpected force, and Daeon felt a warm aroma, and terribly familiar. In the blink of an eye, the unfortunate Viscount was brutally slammed against the trunk of the nearest tree. The man, stunned, immediately bent over, unable to stand upright. Exar, with glacial coldness, reminded him that he had already warned him, bluntly, not to dare touch his woman ever again. Surgok shouted heartbreakingly, claiming that miserable slave belonged only to him, and no one had the right to take her away. The count firmly extended his powerful hand, and coldly asked the loyal knight Runo to hand him his sharp sword. At that critical moment, the prince himself suddenly appeared in the meadow, and shouted for everyone to stop immediately. The count had captured Orang, and Viscount Surgok was a loyal servant of the king. He could even be considered a valuable envoy. However, the prince's authoritarian words failed to stop the furious Exar in any way. He lunged quickly and with a swift, brutal movement, mercilessly severed the Viscount's left hand. Surgok instantly screamed in despair from the unbearable, hellish pain, promising that never would he forgive this monstrous act. The count, with a complacent, almost predatory smile, explained that he simply couldn't leave him the hand with which he dared to touch his woman. Now, the astonished prince couldn't say anything, so he ordered the knights to take the wounded Viscount away and provide him with urgent help. Exar, firmly taking the girl's hand, also hurried to leave. But as he passed Zack, he heard that they would discuss everything in the morning. Zack mentioned the three of them, him, the slave, and the count, to which Exar coldly replied that His Highness could forget it. As soon as they reached the nearest room, the count slammed Daeon against the wall and lunged at her. The man coldly asked if she really intended to leave with that disgusting Viscount. Daeon nodded slowly, but Exar didn't understand the hidden reasons for her sudden decision. But apparently, the brunette wasn't going to answer, simply looking away to the side. This infuriated the man, so he forcefully lifted the girl's beautiful face and ordered her to only look at him. Exar strictly ordered her not to shut herself off, to show her true emotions. He sincerely desired Dawn to be happy, to cry, to laugh, to be selfish, and finally become a complete person. The girl replied that she didn't want to be happy, as the Lord's feelings were temporary, caused only by simple curiosity. The man tenderly circled her beautiful face with his strong hands, and slowly, but resolutely pulled her towards him. Their lips met immediately, but the man intensified the pressure, making the kiss rougher and insistent. Daeon froze when the man's strong hand revealed part of her chest, leaving her breathless. She desperately tried to resist, but the count only pressed her harder against the cold wall, increasing its intensity. When fragile Daeon began to tremble visibly with fear, Exar abruptly pulled away. Loosening his grip, he gently took her cold hand between his, and then carefully kissed her slender fingers. Trying to calm her, Exar made her a firm promise and shouldn't have, although in reality he already hated those damned kiss tickets. It doesn't matter if she trusts him or not. The girl must believe only one thing: he will live much longer than her. And when Daeon inevitably dies, he will take care of taking away her lifeless body. No matter how old she is, whether she is still alive or already dead, she now totally belongs to him, and unconditionally only to him. After this, the count decisively went to His Highness's chambers, and directly, he informed him that he could gather his things. Zack asked, perplexed, if this was how the count treated his distinguished guests in his castle. But it was the prince himself who brought the Viscount here, so he must assume all responsibility and leave immediately. Ignoring his insolent words, Zack asked if he was okay. Incredible, the first prince of the kingdom suddenly takes an interest in an insignificant slave. Zack said he was much more worried about Exar, as that man likes to forcibly take everything he wants. To which the blonde replied rudely that only stray dogs shamelessly drool over what belongs to others. The prince indignantly told the count that, because of his foul mouth, The king himself had struck him off a long time ago. Exar confidently headed towards the exit, throwing over his shoulder that tomorrow morning, at 7 sharp, they could meet. He would give them 10 minutes. The count, surprisingly, kept his word. The first prince arrived first at the meeting place, and soon Daeon herself approached him unhurriedly. This time the girl looked very simple, but even in that humble attire, she remained incredibly beautiful and attractive. Zack didn't believe there existed a slave who wouldn't try to flatter him. He reported that Exar was only a temporary invader in that territory, so he was curious whether the girl wanted to stay in Orang. Perhaps it's a difficult question, but if Dawn really wants to get away from Exar, the prince will hand her over to Sergoku. The girl doesn't lower her head like other slaves, but she doesn't look him in the eye either. Exar always took whatever he wanted. Sincere love is alien to him. He will surely get rid of this toy as soon as he gets bored. And poor Dawn will only have bitter regrets. He will wait for her, just like Zack's younger sister, named Anna. The prince, full of determination, offered the slave to take her under his protection, but Daeon flatly refused the prince's proposition. Zack mockingly asked how he could even talk about trusting him like that, since Exar, although good, only loves himself, so he can safely be considered an experienced Casanova. But the cunning heroine knew it well, and yet the count was her only support. Zack asked mockingly how he could even talk about trusting him like that. Daeon calmly replied that her lord promised to claim her inert corpse. The first prince assumed that those strange words reminded her of her distant home. Just at that moment, a peculiar noise interrupted their morning chat. It was Exar, who had already brought a luxurious carriage and was impatiently waiting for his highness. Zack didn't delay any longer, so the count wished him an easy and safe journey. Once in the carriage, the prince revealed that Anna still rejected suitors, faithful to Exar. The blonde coldly replied that it was high time she got married and stopped waiting. An unsettling rumor was even circulating. She was pregnant with the count. Zack's sister fell into a deep depression and even started losing weight rapidly. And Exar didn't even console her. But the blonde would swear by all the gods that he did not take liberties with her, as he doesn't need dead weight in his life. These cold words outraged the first prince, and he roughly grabbed Exar by the neck. The pregnancy rumor also surprised the count, who was sure that the prince came only because Anna asked him to. But even the king himself sincerely wants Exar to marry the princess, as that bastard has a very good status. However, if that happens, the blonde was sure that the country wouldn't last even a year under such administration. To which Zack, with a cunning smile, replied that even the wildest beast can be tamed, if one knows how. Exar is the perfect opportunity to contain the aristocrats who want to rebel. And if they tame him, the count will be useful. The blonde tried to explain that the princess is not defenseless, but Zack didn't listen, and ordered the coachman to start immediately. In reality, the prince knew perfectly well that Anna has a very bad temper, but it is only because she is still very young. Zack felt weird, and all because of that enigmatic woman who acted like nothing mattered to her. Maybe, in the end, she will have to be handed over to Sergok. Upon entering, Exar saw that Daeon was closely examining oriental objects, and her gaze was filled with wonder with each one. He quickly put on a mask, and smiling, asked the girl if it suited her well. Dawn, without hesitation, took the mask off him and explained that the lord had put it on backward, which caused laughter. Reacting, the girl immediately apologized, embarrassed, and hurried out of the room. She only touched the count a little, but for him, that is catastrophically little, because the man even lacked that. No matter how much he hugs Daeon, he has a crazy desire to hand over his entire body to her, and soul without reservation. Exar madly desired to be constantly by her side, to feel her presence. The man dropped the mask onto the polished table and unintentionally knocked over a strange object, and obviously ancient. Upon seeing it, Daeon's usually impassive face transformed into a gesture of genuine surprise. It turned out that this small object was very familiar to her. A loving mother always makes one like this for her daughter when she gets married. Exar proposed keeping it as a birthday gift. A slight blush immediately appeared on Daeon's delicate cheeks, promising to treasure that valuable gift carefully. The count had never seen such a sincere expression on her. Usually, people are happy with more expensive things. The man sat on the boxes and suddenly promised the brunette that he would never make her feel bad. No matter how much his blood boiled, Exar swore he shouldn't have been so rough with her at that moment. The real reason Dawn doesn't reject him is probably that the girl is simply very afraid of him. Exar solemnly promised that, from that moment on, he would never touch her without her express consent, and he would try his best to maintain that necessary distance that she sincerely desires between them. Diana felt silently, and the blonde told her that he had to leave for Galan for a couple of days. So he asked the brunette to prepare her luggage. They wouldn't see each other for a while, but the man wouldn't stop thinking about her for a second. Outside, a light snowfall began, but Dayan remained seated, leaning against the cold wall, as if waiting for something or someone. Shefar noticed her solitary figure passing by and decided to approach cautiously to find out what was wrong. He politely greeted the lady and immediately saw her injured hands. Shefar knew that Dayan had been entrusted with a difficult job. The man asked with concern if she really needed to work so hard, given how in love the Lord is with her. To which the girl calmly replied that, if the Count lost interest in her, she would have to work hard anyway. In that case, there was absolutely no point in abandoning her work, not even for a fleeting love. This unexpected decision by the girl is quite wise and practical. After talking to her, Shefar understood that she couldn't lead a normal life. Dawn, suddenly, out of nowhere, asked when he would return, her gaze full of hope. Exar's secretary frowned, not understanding what was going through that strange girl's head. The man impassively replied that his lord would probably never return to that castle. He loves to travel, and now that the situation in Orank has finally stabilized, he has no reason to stay. The Count is a famous Casanova. Wherever he goes, he is always surrounded by beautiful women. Thinking about it, Dayan probably no longer feels that her life is in danger. That's why she's not thinking of escaping. That's why she lived here for 7 years and fled from the cruel Viscount Surgok only because she was constantly oppressed. But these were only Jefar's thoughts, because he had very few real reasons to trust her. At this unsettling moment, a terrified knight ran up to the Count's advisor. His face pale, and immediately, gasping, he reported that his lord had suffered a terrible misfortune. In the hallway was Rob, always sticking close to Exar when escorting him, with an anger he couldn't hide. Exar himself lay inert on the bed, unconscious, with a bloody mouth, which did not bode well. A few hours earlier, the Count was riding at full speed through a dense forest when a heavy snowfall suddenly began. Exar felt a bad omen the entire time, so they needed to get out of the dangerous forest as soon as possible. Suddenly, an arrow hit the man forcefully, and losing balance, Exar fell heavily from his horse. Rob stopped immediately and quickly ran towards his master. At that dangerous moment, 3 more sharp arrows were fired quickly, flying directly towards their target. The knight drew his sword instantly and decisively eliminated the sudden threat. Protecting himself and the Count, to Exar's great surprise, it was the first time in his long life that he had been shot at with arrows. Without thinking twice, he abruptly pulled it out of his bloody body, feeling a sharp pain. And unbearable. Most likely, that treacherous arrow was poisoned with a potent toxic. 3 archers emerged from the forest, so Exar ordered Rob to finish them off as soon as possible, leaving only one alive. The Count's intuition did not fail him at all. Exar cursed under his breath, as the powerful poison began to spread rapidly through his body. After dealing with all the insolent mercenaries, Rob immediately ran to his master. Trying to help him, barely audible, overcoming the pain, Exar asked if they had managed to capture any of the attackers alive. The knight apologized, as the last mercenary committed suicide, so the Count asked to take a corpse for investigation. Rob carefully seated his master on the horse, and just at that moment, Exar felt himself gradually losing consciousness. Although he will regret it later, he would very much like to see Dawn smile with joy. While the new Count is on the verge of life and death, an incredibly tense atmosphere reigns in the castle, and disturbing, and the problems are much greater in his original territory, Galan, than in the newly and successfully captured Orang. If the rumor spreads that his lord's life is in grave danger, his numerous enemies will certainly show their sharp fangs. First, armed soldiers must be sent to Galan immediately, and everyone else left to safely protect Orang. When this place fell into the powerful hands of the Lord, the situation was extremely unstable. It cannot be denied that people might rebel. The servants must be ordered to keep their mouths shut and behave as if nothing had happened. Working on the report, Sephar shuddered upon hearing a familiar voice. Exar reported with disgust that his whole body was burning and his head was splitting. Shefar did not show his joy at the Lord's awakening. He only said that they had not found who led the attackers. Exar ironically asked if they would hold a funeral now or pretend he hadn't survived. But if they do that, Princess Anna will be the first to run here. With a heavy sigh, the Count suggested stopping by the funeral. Even the brave lord tries to avoid Princess Anna by all means. Exar supposed that the enemy must now be worried about whether he survived or not. As soon as any invitation arrives, Exar asks to reply that he is very busy and will not be able to attend the event. Jeffar nodded and reported that, in that case, he would go. Right at the exit, the advisor reported that she had become less talkative. After the lord lost consciousness, Daeon did not utter a word for these 4 days. A slight smile appeared on Exar's face. For Daeon's birthday, the Count wanted to give her herbs to put in a small bag, so he asked to find out what she would like. If the girl doesn't answer anything, the assistant can bring her here so Exar himself can find out. Leaving the master's room, Jeffar noticed Daeon nearby. In the midst of the chaos, when the Count was carried unconscious to the castle, Jeffar saw dread on the brunette's face. She was so worried that she was afraid to approach to take care of him, because she knows she is a foreigner. If you look at it that way, she is a calm and pragmatic woman. Daeon didn't know when the master would return, so she sat and waited for him that day. And she kept waiting in that icy corridor, even though her feet hurt a lot. Probably Daeon doesn't even notice that pain, because all her attention is only on the master. Even though she was so worried, she kept waiting. Someone like Daeon will be loyal and stand by his side if her husband is captured by enemies or taken hostage, and that is exactly what the master wanted to see in his ideal wife. Sephar reported that the master wanted to know what herbs to give her for her birthday, but it is better that the girl tells him herself. Dawn entered Exar's room and sat there until late into the night, and almost at nightfall, she informed him that she would love to receive Rosemary. Several long-awaited weeks passed since then, and Exar fully regained his strength. Seeing Dawn on the street, sitting on the cold steps, the kind man hastily brought her his warm coat. The brunette shuddered slightly in surprise, suddenly feeling something very soft and warm over her fragile shoulders. Exar sat calmly very close to her and supposed that in the imminent and harsh winter, a lot of snow would undoubtedly fall. The general atmosphere of the relationships between the protagonists has changed noticeably. Now Daeon is completely different. The man supposed that the mere fact that he almost died was enough for such serious changes to occur. It seems that Daeon, little by little, begins to open her hidden heart and her sincere trust specifically to him a little more. That feeling was born only out of curiosity, but Exar now craves her heart completely. He had never experienced such deep and unusual emotions. Exar passionately desired to be the only one whom Daeon allowed to shorten the personal distance so much. He told her that she was very quiet and suggested it was because of what had happened. Her mind may be on the war, but her body is here. Remember that there is warmth nearby. Exar yearned for her to remember that pleasant warmth that he wished to give her. Taking Daeon's hands, the blonde pulled them towards him and kissed them. The young and fragile girl revealed that the war was the least of her worries now. Suddenly, the Count asked thoughtfully, what country did she dream of building for the future? Daeon replied that it should be a world for everyone, where children smile and adults do not suffer, where every person can live with dignity, free from suffering or unnecessary worries. Exar smiled slightly and immediately proposed trying to build that beautiful country together. In kind, hand in hand, every small child, and even any adult, deserves inalienable happiness. This bold idea of Daeon is a direct challenge to the entire established system, as she wants to completely destroy the aristocratic family. In short, it is a true rebellion, because from the perspective of the privileged, there is no difference between a commoner and a slave. Geylan is a huge and lively port, where merchants from all over the world dock. Absolutely anything can be found there. The young heroine anxiously replied that this could be very dangerous. Exar leaned gently towards the girl and asked her very carefully what he should do to survive the imminent harsh winter that lay ahead. Finding no answer, the man slowly sat down, leaning on his strong knees, and declared that he needed to reflect seriously. Even if the world around us changes completely, people themselves will never absolutely change in it, because humans are, by nature, incredibly stubborn animals. Few accept changes in life so easily, but one can try to change people directly. Then, when they change themselves, they will undoubtedly change the world around them. In other words, they need to create a special place where people's consciousness can be effectively changed. But to start, they must somehow survive the imminent icy winter. Therefore, both heroes unexpectedly decided to start by building a huge and fun snowman. In a short time, this fun snow creation was completely finished. The loyal Jeffar approached the young couple unhurriedly to talk seriously with his high-ranking lord. As soon as Daeon left, the devoted assistant revealed that they had received an unpleasant, official, negative response to the invitation. Exar thought that Viscount Surgok would undoubtedly refuse to meet with him. It was a total disrespect from the conceited Viscount. The heroes only wanted to apologize sincerely. With a malicious smile, Exar ordered the secretary to gather everything instantly. They were leaving immediately. Jeffar was dumbfounded by this sudden decision. His lord was injured and just out of bed. He shouldn't travel so far and exhaust himself. There will be alcohol at the banquet. He will have to sit for a long time. But Surgok surely thinks the same. He surely thinks the count is bedridden and slowly dying from the poison. The assistant politely reminded his lord that for now he had no irrefutable proof. But Exar was going to find all the necessary evidence when he personally saw that Cretan's face. In a short time, a couple of brave riders and strong knights, along with the noble Count Malhut, arrived at the Viscount's mansion. With a big triumphant smile, Exar shouted at the top of his lungs for Surgok to open the gates immediately. Soon, the Viscount unexpectedly appeared at the huge main gate, along with his two fierce house dogs. Deep irritation and obvious incomprehension were clearly read on his pale face. Exar slowly began to ascend the stairs and cunningly asked if the dogs were in charge of that castle now. The Viscount asked with extreme indignation what exactly Count Exar meant at that moment. The furious dogs began to growl menacingly, clearly showing their hostility towards the intruder. The blonde looked at them coldly, without expressing any emotion. The frightened hounds immediately fell silent, lowered their ears, and submissively bowed their heads. Recognizing his superiority, Exar explained that normally the host comes out to meet the guests, but unexpectedly, he encountered the dogs first. The blonde confidently placed himself right in front of the Viscount, openly displaying his undoubted superiority over him. The man ironically told Surgok that he had a face, as if an aristocrat had seen a real ghost. The Viscount, forcing a feigned smile, replied that he simply didn't expect the Count to come uninvited at all. Leaning very close to Surgok's ear, Exar firmly whispered to him that he didn't need invitations. And now the Viscount surely wouldn't kick him out of there. The Count walked past the aristocrat and, raising his hand, exclaimed with joy that they would have a great time today. While the lord was having fun, his knights and riders lit a large bonfire on the rampart and sat down to rest. Rob said that, passing by the dense forest, they smelled a very unpleasant odor. The knight was used to having nothing like that at home, so he covered his nose because it was impossible to breathe. Jeffar replied that it was similar in Gaelan, but Rob didn't agree with that at all. There, a peculiar smell is noticeable everywhere, even in the royal castle. But there are still differences. The riders were in total agreement. Lately, Orank had become much calmer and noticeably cleaner. In the capital, people flee when they see them, but in Orank, they smile at the Count's subordinates, which comforts them. In other lands, taxes grow non-stop, because the wise aristocrats are in the midst of an arms race. More and more people live in absolute misery, and therefore bandits and dangerous thieves emerge everywhere. But in Iran, nothing is heard of thieves. Taxes are well managed. There are no bandits. People feel safe. Jeffar saw his lord so calm clearly for the first time. And all this only thanks to Daeon. The assistant no longer had doubts that his excellent lord had indeed drawn the best girl. Between interesting chats, time flew by. And at dawn, only Jeffar and Runno remained by the campfire. The Count's assistant immediately understood that Sir Runno wanted to ask him something really important. Therefore, he decided to ask first if Sir Runno had reached any definitive conclusion. The man poured an aromatic hop drink into a glass and, with a warm smile, replied that everything was already decided. Runno decided to recount in detail that, when they went to Surgok, the lord, without turning around, said the following: "If he disappears, Runno will undoubtedly become the next legitimate ruler." The knight didn't expect to hear such a sudden and incredible declaration at all. Upon hearing it, Runno seriously thought that perhaps he shouldn't doubt the girl chosen by his lord. Soon, all the protagonists successfully and without problems returned to their native hour. Shefar saw his lord with Daeon and clearly understood that they made the perfect couple. The assistant was forced, with regret, to interrupt their innocent and adorable games. The young woman bowed, perfectly understanding that she had to leave immediately. The Count asked the assistant if they had managed to find out anything important. Shefar explained in detail that most of Surgok's soldiers are mercenaries, something noticeable in winter. Considering that his vast territory borders the sea, it was to be expected. Of course, the secretary doubted there was any real loyalty. For pirates, this is just business. The other lords also used pirates a lot. After all, they worked very cheaply. Pirates benefit from this relationship. They are not afraid of being executed for piracy. But Jeffer, on top of everything, wanted to say something else. Something important and worrying. It turned out that Surgok, in exchange for protecting his territory, gives them freedom, women, and even children. It is a very serious crime. But in Exar's castle, he did not see that the Viscount held any children or young people captive. The thing is, there are horrible rumors that he is actually eating human flesh. The Count immediately understood that Daeon fled from that monster, upon noticing that children were disappearing one after another, or even saw with his own eyes how this monster mercilessly devoured unfortunate people. Every child, and even every adult, deserves inalienable happiness. With that horrible thought alone, his hands involuntarily clenched into fists. The blonde did not understand how Daeon could hate him so deeply and sincerely. Sephar tried to justify the poor girl, saying that she couldn't do anything at that moment. The Count abruptly directed his severe and assessing gaze towards his faithful assistant. Sephar gently recalled that Daeon is by nature a calm, strong girl, and very intelligent. She is the only woman who can speak with Count Malhut as an equal, so I doubt she will return to her torturer. The girl surely devised a skillful and ingenious way to get out of that difficult situation. Even at the height of his anger, the Lord always listens attentively if he is told the right things. This important quality is precisely what distinguishes him from all other arrogant aristocrats. Therefore, the Count should stop drawing hasty conclusions. That characteristic is not typical of a wise ruler. Accepting his assistant's important words, Exar promised to always remember his valuable advice. Jafar still couldn't fully trust Down, maintaining some caution, but he was absolutely sure that she would have an exclusively positive influence on the Count. This made Exar laugh a lot, as Jafar was now behaving like a careful mother giving her blessing. But the assistant's sincere words noticeably encouraged the distressed blonde. The man almost gave in to anger and invented unnecessary things, but thanks to the wise Jafar, he managed to overcome it. Therefore, the Count will definitely listen to his wise words. That said, Exar calmly headed back to the castle. From the Lord's appearance alone, it could be clearly seen that it was also very difficult for him. This circumstance constantly worried Jafar. He slowly bowed his head in respect, following with his gaze the majestic lord who was moving away. Meanwhile, deep in the damp and dark dungeon of the ancient castle of the serene Viscount Surgok, the aristocrat tightly squeezed the deformed, freshly severed hand in his grip and cursed furiously under his breath. The Viscount was sure that this despicable scoundrel would die, as the mercenaries said they wounded Exar with poisoned arrows. But then, against all expectation and assumption, he looked completely healthy and full of energy. Exar ate delicious food nonchalantly, drank wine eagerly, and even had non-stop fun, without feeling any pain. The Count, along with his insatiable knights, completely devoured all the food prepared for the long and harsh winter, and on top of that, they shamelessly forced the Viscount to apologize publicly, when it was Exar who took his beloved slave away. Therefore, that disgusting insolent will have to pay cruelly and heavily for all his vile deeds. Viscount Surgok currently has only one way to calm his rampant fury. He entered the Great Hall, where numerous metal cages hung from the high ceiling. The Viscount longed to hear the desperate cries of a helpless child, begging him not to kill him. Daeon was, without a doubt, one of the rarest and most valuable components of his entire terrible collection. She managed to escape from him on a day as incredibly snowy and truly cold as today. Her skin white as snow, on which he didn't even want to leave scars, and her body wouldn't bruise from blows. Surgok didn't understand how he could escape so easily from his strong and truly powerful love. The man walked slowly, but decisively, towards one of the suspended steel cages. The little girl inside shuddered in horror upon clearly hearing Surgok's approaching footsteps. Daeon was the first who ever showed a shadow of true fear on her brave face. She could go for days without asking for food or clean water, with pride and submission. And in her deep dark eyes, it seemed there was nothing, only emptiness. Therefore, Sir Gok's Viscount was absolutely obliged to get her back, at any cost. But now the big question arises. How will he quickly separate these lovebirds? Even the powerful king bowed to Exar, so Sir Gok cannot ask for royal help from His Majesty. The Viscount pulled the metal lever hard and abruptly, without thinking twice. The sturdy metal cage descended with a loud, piercing noise. The little girl began to cry inconsolably and scream in desperation, aware of what was about to happen. Without any mercy, the cruel aristocrat roughly grabbed the poor girl by the hair and pulled her out of the iron cage. When everything was finally over, Sir Gok could finally feel some long-awaited relief. He completely understood that the powerful count has only two main weaknesses: his young and very loyal assistant, and also the amazing Daeon. What if his right hand and Daeon get into big trouble at the same time? Exar will have to choose quickly whom to save. Sir Gok could easily set a well-thought-out trap for him. Even knowing it's a cunning trap, Exar will have to jump in head first. But among all the aristocrats in the kingdom, it will be difficult to find new hidden enemies. In that case, apparently, the person he is looking for is deep within the royal family. In other words, Viscount Sir Gok can always ask the young Princess Anna for help. Soon, the powerful Count Exar became worried when he learned that his beloved Daeon had a bad cold. If someone had poisoned her, unlike the Count, the girl would no longer be breathing. As someone who reminds Exar of the harm of alcohol, the healer had the right to these comments. That powerful blonde would never lose to a poisoned arrow. The healer was sure. There was nothing serious in that simple ailment, but if Daeon has no life force, she will die even from a cold. Now, absolutely everything, her precious life and recovery, depend on Count Exar's decisions. Daeon has lived in this majestic castle for 8 years, but in all this time, she never even had a cold. The young woman always performed the hardest physical labor, but never got sick. Lately, the attentive Count Exar didn't give Daeon any excessively hard work or exhausting. The young woman simply felt much less physical stress and undoubtedly felt much more relieved. And all this incredible relief and peace were made possible thanks to the generosity and kindness of her lord. Upon hearing the pleasant news, a faint, almost imperceptible smile appeared on Count Exar's lips. Now, the weakened Daeon needs to rest well and eat properly. Exar must wake her up. Indeed, the experienced castle healer could see the young woman's genuine smile for the first time. Exar shuddered slightly, and the kind woman added tenderly that Daeon's beautiful smile was very sweet, like that of a small, innocent child. The man asked indignantly. Now Daeon very often prepares a delicious and nutritious stew for the little children who study diligently in this new school. It was then that the kind woman attentively noticed how the fragile brunette smiled sincerely and happily. She was looking at the fabric. That strange piece of fabric was of a very bright and intense red color. Knowing this, Exar could not contain his joyful smile, as Daeon apparently really liked that small pouch. Daeon was not smiling yet. An expert healer recounted that Daeon even laughed while enthusiastically telling her about the noble lord. As soon as the old woman finished her story and left, Exar let out a loud laugh. The count asked Daeon when she would give him a smile. Pouring the prepared medicine into a small spoon, Exar carefully brought it to the mouth of the weakened young woman. Leaning gently towards the sleeping heroine, the attentive blonde whispered tenderly if she was listening closely. Daeon slightly parted her soft lips. Suddenly, the fragile girl began to speak confusedly in her sleep, surprising the powerful Exar, who shuddered slightly. Daeon was mumbling something very quietly to herself, so the man had to listen carefully and cautiously. She repeated the word mama. At Daeon's strange sudden murmur, the man's eyes opened in surprise and astonishment. The powerful count so wanted his beloved Daeon to scream loudly if she was truly in pain. She was suffering while sleeping. Perhaps she dreamed of what she experienced in Sir Goka's castle, or a nightmare about the war in her homeland. Daeon has almost no happy memories of the past. Not even in dreams does the poor girl find peace. Exar lay down next to the young woman, hugged her tenderly, and whispered to her that everything is fine now, because he is by her side. It was the only thing the powerful Exar could do now to calm her. A hand touched her chest. The solicitous Exar gently took her small trembling hand in his, firmly. Maybe because of a bad cold, but Daeon's body was burning, as if it were about to melt, and her hands were icy cold. It is hard to imagine Exar. This fragile slave completely and irrevocably stole his heart in a single short day. Now, the attentive blonde was absolutely ready to dedicate the rest of his life only to her. Exar kissed Daeon. He solemnly promised in his mind, to his unique and unrepeatable Daeon, that he would always be by her side. A smile appeared on Princess Anna's lips as soon as she finished reading the letter. When Daeon felt better, Exar carried her out in his arms to get some fresh air. It wasn't that cold outside today, so it could be done without a problem. Count Exar happily decided to take his beloved Daeon for a sleigh ride around the snowy courtyard. Despite their short but strong legs, these amazing pigs turned out to be incredibly fast. With a simple thin stick, you can control them easily and effortlessly, directing them wherever you want. Exar said this in such an incredibly serious tone that Daeon couldn't help a chuckle that escaped her lips. Exar carefully offered her a sweet dried fruit and tenderly asked her to eat it to regain strength. It was a prune, extraordinarily delicious, carefully dehydrated, and mixed with crunchy nuts. Dawn chewed it with such sweetness and enthusiasm that the man couldn't resist, and playfully touched her chubby cheek with a finger. Exar handed the brunette a small but heavy pot, filled to the brim with ripe plums, and allowed her to eat them all. It's boring to be locked up between four cold walls, even if the girl is sick, and she clearly really wanted to see the children at school. Suddenly, Daeon, with a slight smile, offered him a juicy plum directly from her pot. Exar accepted it without hesitation, directly from the hands of his beloved Daeon, and while he was at it, he tenderly licked the girl's small fingers. The man slowly, but decisively, moved away. But a thin, shining thread of saliva still gently connected their lips and Daeon's finger. The young woman blushed instantly when the Count told her it was delicious. She gently touched Exar's blushing cheek and told him in a low but affectionate voice that there was honey there. A warm and sincere smile appeared on her delicate lips. The blonde confessed to the slave that right now, he longed to tenderly kiss her pretty lips. But he didn't, promising to return when it was clearer outside, and then he hit the piglet hard on the rear and loudly ordered it to move forward immediately. The animals shot off instantly, quickly dragging the sleigh with Daeon sitting on it. After that, Exar, with a smile on his face, went straight to his private office. At first glance, you could clearly see how he was literally radiating overflowing happiness, while poor Sephar has to deal alone with a huge pile of papers. While this happy idiot cheerfully chirps, he handed the Lord an urgent letter, which came directly from the royal family, something very unusual. The Count reluctantly unwrapped it and began to read carefully, slowly, what it said. It turned out that the bad news came from Princess Anna, as she was going to come to Orank. Her Highness wanted to stay until next summer, but for now planned to arrive before spring. Exar concluded that Prince Zach did not know how to keep his mouth shut, and was very chatty. The Count ordered his assistant to immediately bring him a clean quill and fresh ink. He immediately started writing an angry reply to the letter, where he clearly explained to the princess that a young single woman could not do that. Jeffar indignantly asked his lord if he was really going to write that seriously. However, the Count had already done it, without giving his assistant time to react. So now the assistant must urgently send it to its destination. The master's order was unquestionable, so Jeffar had to obey and leave the Count's office. If Princess Anna comes to Orang, there will be big problems. Obviously she won't come alone. She will bring maids and the royal guard. But the big problem lies in what might arise between Daeon and Princess Anna. However, the biggest and most unpredictable problem will be how the master will behave. There are no problems in the relationship between Daeon and the master, but if Anna interferes, there will be misfortunes. The master will surely worry a lot about Daeon and hover around her, drawing attention. When Princess Anna realizes this, she will be furious at such obvious affection. And if Viscount Surgok finds out, it will be the worst and most dangerous scenario. Only Daeon can influence this situation. The master adores her and might listen to her. Moreover, it seems things are going much better for them. And we love that. Now she looks at him tenderly, and to think that Sephar believed she was a doll without a smile. The boy thought about encouraging them to formalize their relationship so that everything would become serious. But if things don't go well, their relationship could break forever. Zephyr trembled, just imagining what his enraged master would do to him. If the boy wanted to avoid trouble with Princess Anna, there was only one option. Zephyr would surely have to turn to her. He had no other alternative. Daeon was outside, enjoying feeding some adorable piglets. Zephyr approached her and suggested they talk alone. They decided to do it in the room. Daeon prepared hot tea in precious cups. Every time Zephyr saw her, he was amazed by her fine manners and incredible composure. If someone claimed Daeon was a true noble, he would believe it without hesitation. The hero politely asked if she liked the delicious venison, and she nodded. In reality, Rob had obtained that fresh meat, so Daeon would eat well and gain weight. Therefore, Zephyr immediately told this important detail to the young brunette, so that she would know. Daeon skeptically recalled that she was only a slave, so she could not eat meat obtained by a knight. If it were known that a lord was so close to her, big problems would surely arise. And no matter what, Daeon's low status as a slave cannot be changed. It's the law. Zephyr told her amazing stories of maids who received the king's grace and became nobles, but Daeon was not a maid, unless they found a way to change her status by bypassing the law. Now the young brunette only says very logical and reasonable things that make sense. Furthermore, the Lord has many enemies. She firmly understands what might happen in the future. A terrible suspicion invaded Zephyr, and he asked confusedly, "Does she perhaps hate the Lord?" The girl replied directly and honestly that he is undoubtedly a very good lord and noble. It's just that the boy didn't mean that at all. When asking Daeon her question, he sincerely wondered if the noble Count Exar was appealing to Daeon as a man. The young girl politely asked to be clarified again. What exactly does the hero mean? Zephyr decided to speak clearly. He would simply like Daeon and the Count to get a little closer. The brunette skeptically asked the boy, wasn't she a thorn in his side before? It really was like that before, but now Zephyr would like to improve their relationship. So the boy asked Daeon not to hold back and to eat what Rob had fished. And Daeon nodded. Zephyr didn't understand what she was thinking. He couldn't read her thoughts like his lords. For him and the 5 knights, the easiest thing is to protect the lord if Daeon is much closer, because in case of danger, the Count will undoubtedly rush to help Daeon, even if it means risking his life. Dawn directly asked him what exactly he really wanted. After all, this young woman was incredibly intelligent and insightful. Zephyr sincerely asked the beautiful brunette to love the noble Count. He proposed this to Dawn because he sincerely believed that it was quite possible for her. But of course, the human heart, as is known, can never be ordered to love. Daeon replied proudly that she already truly loved the Lord, which made Zephyr choke on his tea. He did not expect such a direct and honest answer, not at all. The girl revealed that it all started when the noble Count gave her the apple. Sometimes his words were terrifying and selfish, but his gaze was tender and kind. She worked all day without eating, and he gave her delicious food and an apple. She had never felt such kindness. And then Daeon stopped being so afraid. But the protagonist did not understand how someone like him could fall in love with someone like her. Hearing this sincere confession, Zephyr smiled warmly and with understanding. Falling in love is a very strange and unpredictable feeling. The Lord has also been through a lot in this hard life, suffering privations. Daeon raised an ice wall around herself to deal with stress, and now because of him, it is slowly melting. Zephyr sincerely believed that their relationship should move forward, become more serious. If things continue like this incomplete relationship could end before it truly begins. Seeing the one you love falling in love with someone else hurts too much, and he wouldn't wish that on anyone. If Daeon doesn't confess her feelings, she might bitterly regret it later. But the young woman honestly thought she didn't deserve such happiness. Many people become strong by not tying themselves to bonds or emotions. But in Daeon's case, the reason is different. She lives as if trying to atone for sins. Zephyr, with a big smile, said he wished her a long and happy life with the Lord. Daeon smiled slightly and nodded in agreement. Suddenly, the boy remembered something crucial and very useful for her. If she goes to the city with the Lord, she can buy whatever she wants, even lace and makeup. That girl's like so much. Zephyr got up from the table, bowed his head, and expressed his hope that they could get along now. His lower lip jutted out slightly, and the boy eagerly awaited the girl's response. Daeon smiled warmly at him and looked kindly at her beloved's assistant. It seems she has accepted his sincere and kind request. The girl sitting smiles at him, and now behaves like a true wife of the Lord with her faithful servant. Back in his room, Zephyr raised his arm to the sky, cheerfully celebrating his small victory. Exar was surprised when the door to his room slowly and silently opened. He asked Daeon, who had just entered, why she was visiting him so late at night. The man immediately assumed that the girl simply couldn't sleep, and that's why she had come to him. Daeon remained silent, embarrassed to say anything, so she lowered her gaze. Exar gently extended his hand and asked her to come closer. The young woman shyly explained that she was simply very cold in her room. The man smiled broadly and replied that he had already put out the fire in the fireplace, so she could get into his bed. The heroine was still unsure, until the Count unexpectedly showed scissors with his fingers. It turns out that all this time she had kept her fists closed, so now she had one, and she could take 3 steps. Down did so uncertainly, not knowing what to expect next. The man playfully suggested playing again to continue having fun. The young woman used paper, and the man supposedly showed stone at the last second. Losing again. Now Dawn can take no less than 5 steps, getting closer to the bed. The brunette shyly headed towards the bed, feeling awkward. Exar's gaze intensified, and he began to stare fixedly at the young woman. Under a certain light, her slender figure was transparent through the nightgown. Daeon stopped right in front of the bed, not daring to come closer. Exar deliberately fluffed the pillows beside him, so that Daeon would be comfortable. He invited the lady to his side, as with this cold, it's best to sleep together. The protagonist nodded and sat down timidly on the bed, trying not to draw attention. The man put his arm around her, pulling her towards him, and carefully covered her with the blanket. He noticed Daeon's tension, so he decided to tickle her to cheer her up. They both burst out laughing, filling the room with joy. Their laughter resonated so much that the heroine didn't even notice when Exar laid her down. He was clearly having fun, so he gently ruffled her hair. Daeon looked at the Count with annoyance, so he gave her a chance to get revenge by tilting his head. But what she didn't expect was for the girl to gently stroke his hair. He closed his eyes, completely losing himself in that pleasant moment of affection. It wasn't easy for Dawn to touch, or even brush against anyone, but she wanted to touch Exar again and again, feeling his warmth. Because the man was very warm and soft, like a big cloud. As soon as Dawn withdrew her hand, Exar smiled pleasantly and moved closer to her. He took a delicate lock of her hair and suggested she go to sleep. Then, the man lay down and strongly pulled the heroine to his broad chest. From the dizzyingly pleasant aroma of Exar, Daeon felt relaxation and began to slowly close her eyes. Exar gently whispered in her ear that it would be great to always sleep together. If Daeon were not by his side like this one day, the man feared imagining what might happen to her. The girl raised her head and looked directly into the Count's eyes, full of tenderness. The man immediately smiled sweetly in response. He hugged Dawn tightly and asked her to sleep, as he was also very tired today. The brunette nestled comfortably on his chest and slowly closed her eyes, falling asleep. Thus, completely unnoticed, several long but so important morning hours passed. The young and fragile girl slowly opened her beautiful eyes, gradually waking up after a very deep sleep. She carefully raised her head and attentively noticed that Exar was still sleeping peacefully beside her. It was the first time Daeon had slept so well and deeply since she left her distant homeland, and it was also the first time Daeon slept so calmly in his warm and safe arms. Looking at the luxurious flowers and jewels, the young woman felt nothing, but in the man's face she saw real beauty. Exar slowly opened his beautiful eyes, blinking a little from the intense morning light. He gently touched Daeon's cute nose with a finger and with a warm smile, said that it was the first time they had slept together. Daeon cautiously got up, with the firm intention of quietly leaving the Count's cozy room. But the man quickly stopped her, grabbing her delicate arm firmly and abruptly, preventing her from leaving. The young woman kindly explained that she still had important work, but the man asked her to rest a little longer. But Daeon firmly replied that she had already rested too much. But the man wanted her to rest a little longer, so that she would regain strength. The heroine promised that she would only be gone for a moment, and skillfully slipped out of his grip. Upon leaving the Count's luxurious room, Daeon's face instantly flushed. She went to him herself yesterday, but it required much more courage than she imagined. Perhaps it is still too early for her to take such important steps. Daeon went out into the courtyard, where a new day was beginning. It was strange, the sun hadn't even risen, and they were already actively transporting things. From an overheard conversation, Daeon learned that a princess would arrive soon, as there was a lot of luggage. There was a lot of work to do, building a place for the knights to live, and also a warehouse. Those horrible knights could cause trouble in the village again. The last time the princess came, it was tough. Orang Castle was tiny, and they already made a scandal by sending people to the village for alcohol. And women. If the princess comes alone, she most likely wants to be alone with the master. Or perhaps she is not just visiting, but coming for an engagement that would change everything. Suddenly, the knights noticed Dayan, who had been spying on them from behind the wall for a while. Princess Anna is on her way. The brunette now understands why Jeffar asked her to get closer to the count. It was to be expected. A nobleman who conquered Orang alone, not even Viscount Surgok could stop him. The king did nothing, likely because of the possible marriage to Princess Anna, fearing conflict. Dayan was sure that Exar also wanted to marry her. After all, the count is ambitious. He needs it to achieve his grand dream and the goals he has set. The princess will open a sea of opportunities for him, while Dayan remains a simple slave. The brunette understood this from the beginning. There is no place for serious relationships with a slave. The young woman went to a quiet, newly opened museum. Dayan regretted most of all those she had left behind. Father, mother, brother. Now they would be rots. Dog food and crows, leaving no trace. The protagonist abandoned her beloved family and fled alone. That was her great sin. Dawn didn't even cry for them and survived alone, overcoming all trials. That day, all the young woman's tears dried up, and she could no longer cry. Her heart hardened. In difficult times, Dawn did not seek rest. She believed she did not deserve to be happy. She thought she should have died, but one day he appeared and said he would take her corpse. Relax, rest, and smile, he told her. Because there is no need to live with clenched teeth. He calmed her and hugged her tightly, conveying a sense of security. At that moment, Dawn perceived the strength and sweetness of the count, as well as his sensuality. The young woman had forgotten when the last time she cried was, but now she couldn't stop. At that moment next to Exar, she felt so warm and comforted. Dayan did not understand how she would continue to live now that she lay so close to the blonde. Jeffar was right, time passes, love can cool down and even break. But the happiest moment of her life will remain forever as this now, the most precious memory. How much courage does she need to gather? Should she wait for her love for him to blossom? Dayan knew one thing for sure. She no longer wants to leave him, even if she regrets it, even if it hurts, even for an instant. Dayan wished to feel like his woman. Exar smiled mockingly and asked the young woman if the fire in the fireplace had gone out again today. Dayan said nothing and went straight to the count's bed, while he poured wine into a glass. In bed, the girl noticed the vouchers for a kiss that the man had not yet used. Unfortunately, her cheeks instantly flushed, as if she felt her heart beating faster. She turned and noticed the count's piercing gaze, which was completely fixed on her. Exar moved closer to her and asked if she understood that the situation was now very different from before. The girl understood him perfectly, so the man wanted to know if she was going to back down. Dayan had no intention of doing so, and was ready to continue their conversation. Full of resolve, taking the vouchers in his hands, Exar handed them to the young woman with a slight smile on his face. A slight blush appeared on the blonde's face as he observed her reaction. Hugging Dayan's waist, Exar tenderly and carefully pulled her towards him. It had been so long since they kissed. Dayan's heart must have been racing with excitement, but now it was Dayan's turn to show her feelings and her willingness for intimacy. The brunette gently touched the man's face, realizing that he was playing hard to get. It is a defense mechanism he uses to avoid showing his true feelings and weaknesses. Exar smiled and approached Dayan's hand with affection and warmth, as if seeking comfort. In reality, this man did not want, or feared, showing his vulnerable side to anyone else. He too, like Dayan, fears shortening the distance between them and truly opening up. Barely moving her lips, the brunette asked the count to look at her closely. And with interest, Exar's eyes widened in surprise at the unexpected tenderness in her request. And gaze. Instantly, the heroine placed her hands on the man's chest, right where his heart was beating. She longed for Exar to open his eyes for her and see the love burning intensely in her soul. The blonde could resist no longer, and with a gentle movement lifted her in his arms, full of tenderness. After sitting Dawn on the bed, the man asked her if she had already eaten dinner or if she was still hungry. Meals cannot be skipped, and besides, the brunette had not yet tasted Robert's venison. Dawn replied that she wasn't hungry, but the man reminded her that she had recently lost consciousness. Therefore, it is crucial now that the girl takes care of her health and worries about herself more than anything. The brunette shuddered as soon as the man asked her if he could leave the light on in the room. The man, with a cunning smile, explained that he was simply getting old. His sight was slightly blurred. He had prepared a tray with food and hoped she would appreciate his effort and his concern for her. Exar offered the girl a prune, but she refused it with a slight smile. but the blonde insisted, because it was very delicious and definitely worth a try. In the end, the girl accepted and nibbled a piece of the prune from the count's hand. Doubtfully, she flinched and looked at Exar surprised, while he smiled with mischief in his eyes. With an agile movement, he snatched the prune from the girl's lips, so fast and unexpected. Then he swallowed it, licked his lips, and told her it was very delicious, that she should try again. Daeon's cheeks flushed with embarrassment and nervousness because of that closeness. The blonde dipped the prune in honey, determined to give the young woman a chance to get revenge. If she doesn't hurry, he will surely soak it with his saliva in anticipation, expecting something more. Overcoming fear, Dawn slowly leaned towards the count, her heart pounding, and tenderness, and then she snatched the prune from his hands with a smile, ready to play. She was just about to move away when Exar held the nape of her neck, preventing her from doing so suddenly. The next instant, their lips joined in an intoxicating and long-awaited kiss. Just as fresh air began to run short, the man pulled away from her lightly but firmly. With a cunning and devilish smile, he sweetly asked the stunned girl if it wasn't sweet and delicious now. Then he calmly took a pair of ripe, juicy, and aromatic prunes from the elegant plate. The man carefully and delicately placed one of them, red and juicy, right into the beautiful Daeon's slightly open mouth. He made each of his refined movements very slowly, trying to prolong that long-awaited moment as much as possible. The second ripe and appetizing prune, Exar supposedly dropped it accidentally, with total carelessness. Worry. As a result of this calculated coincidence, the large and juicy prune fell right under Daeon's light clothing. Exar, with a deep and velvety voice, apologized immediately, and his skilled hand slid incredibly slowly over the girl's smooth thighs. Of course, it was just a well-thought-out, very cunning trick to quickly remove the charming Daeon's remaining clothes. But the young and beautiful heroine did not resist his insistent actions at all. As soon as the fragile girl was completely naked, Exar immediately scanned his beloved with an attentive gaze. And lustful, Hatem very slowly reached out his hand towards the light towel, carefully wrapped around her bare hips. Soon, that single towel fell silently onto the cold marble floor. The man gently took an elegant glass in his hands. Then he offered the beautiful brunette to drink her favorite alcohol. Then, unhurriedly, he took just a couple of big sips of this aromatic drink. He gallantly offered the remaining half of the fragrant drink to Daeon. However, the young woman refused. Flickering candles, pure salt, their first magical night, and an intoxicating red wine. Daeon was smart enough to understand that this looked a lot like an ancient wedding rite. Both protagonists knew perfectly well that, in reality, they couldn't marry in any way. But Exar did not want, in any way, to ruin the fate of this beautiful young woman like this. In that magical moment, they were in an incredible place, where logic had no power. The man carefully dipped his long, elegant finger into the dense, red, and intoxicating wine. Taking the young woman's delicate hand, Exar solemnly confessed his eternal love to her. Asking God to be his witness, he carefully drew a symbolic ring on the slender ring finger of the charming Daeon. The young woman smiled sincerely and tenderly, and then quietly told him that this ring was very beautiful. Apparently, there was no reason to rejoice, but for the fragile Daeon, this meant a lot. Exar moved closer, and their lips joined again in a passionate kiss, making their hearts beat strongly. It is hard to imagine how long the Count waited for this moment. This longed for closeness, from his soft, swollen lips, the man slowly moved to the heroine's delicate ears. Then he moved down to her elegant collarbones, making Daeon laugh softly because he was tickling her. Exar leaned heavily over her, and finally the long-awaited moment arrived, when they would be one forever. The man passionately, furiously clung to the tender and tempting lips of the beautiful heroine. Then, carefully, he took her slender leg to gently separate her firm hips. Dawn was extremely embarrassed, so she awkwardly tried to cover herself with her hands. Exar leaned gently towards the girl and calmed her with affectionate words, telling her not to hold back. And then our heroes surrendered completely, forgetting themselves to their passionate love, giving each other warmth and affection. Exar was completely insatiable for several long and passionate hours. When everything was finally over, he suggested to Daeon that she relax a bit and rest quietly. And then he suggested the girl ask his lordship if he could allow her a short break from the kitchen. Thus, the beautiful Daeon could stay with him for at least a while, as the Count would grant her a well-deserved day off. Exar sincerely hoped that the beautiful brunette would forgive his understandable selfishness. The man's words were so funny that Daeon simply couldn't help but smile sincerely. The brave blonde forcefully pulled his beloved brunette close and affectionately offered her to sleep a little. The girl slowly, but gently closed her tired eyes, and the man suddenly realized that he had finally found the light, the true wine of life, which sweetly and tenderly inebriates the human soul. Now Exar was sure. He was hopelessly in love with this wonderful woman, whom he now wished to call his legitimate wife. A few hours later, Dawn woke up from sleep and slowly, carefully got up, covering her naked body with a soft blanket. The man suddenly and decisively grabbed her hand and asked where she was going so quickly. She reminded him, surprised, that she had to work in the kitchen, but Exar insisted that she not leave. The Count was unaware that, in reality, the beautiful Daeon urgently needed to use the bathroom. Therefore, he begged her to stay with him until night and promised to let her go the next morning. She remained silent, so Exar reached for her leg and gently tickled her. Daeon stopped the man immediately and firmly asked him to stop touching her at once. Exar asked to touch her a little more, to which she replied that he had touched her enough already. The man calmly replied that as long as there was light, he would examine every corner of her being. Dawn quickly wrapped herself in a thick blanket to prevent the Count from carrying out his plan. The blonde snorted annoyed, and then rested his head directly on his beloved soft legs. The man slowly raised his hands, and the girl immediately noticed the clear shadow of his hand on the canopy, in the shape of a bird. A completely genuine, tender smile suddenly appeared on Daon's delicate lips. She also gently extended her hand and gracefully imitated a beautiful swan. As soon as it was completely morning, the young and beautiful girl slowly walked out onto the street. Exar immediately approached, dragging a huge, quite heavy sled with him. Then the man slowly extended his strong hand and gently took Daeon's hand. Like the most authentic and courteous knight, he gallantly helped the young woman sit comfortably on the sled. And then he positioned himself behind and immediately began to push the sled intensely. Reaching the right speed, the Count skillfully and elegantly jumped directly onto the moving sled. Daeon filled with joy, and the man let out a funny and sincere laugh. But suddenly, the sled going at full speed unexpectedly hit a small bump. They abruptly overturned, causing the protagonists to instantly fall straight into the soft snow. Exar asked his beloved with great concern if she was in perfect condition. The girl emerged from the snow, and the blonde couldn't contain his laughter seeing a pile of snow on her head. And her stunned gaze. The man compared her to a snowman that was in his winter garden. And Dawn snorted in annoyance. She, very discreetly and agilely, made a small snowball and quickly threw it at the man right under his clothes. Immediately, Exar's cunning, almost devilish smile appeared on his face. Daeon was very satisfied with her bold act, without even suspecting what the man planned to do. She was stunned as soon as he, in a matter of seconds, made a huge snowball and raised it above himself. Exar immediately announced that he was a very merciful man, so he would first count to 10 with clemency. Falling to her knees, Daeon couldn't contain her laughter, sincere and resonant. Exar was also having a lot of fun, but a lot. The girl exclaimed that she surrendered completely, and the Count, magnanimous, forgave her. Suddenly, they heard slow footsteps of someone approaching them. It seems Rob also wants to join their sled ride. It was very cold outside, so Exar extended his hand to Daeon and suggested they return immediately. Approaching the night, Rob quickly informed the Lord that Jeffar was urgently looking for him. It turns out that the important Princess Anna is already on her way. Exar, tired, asked what the big deal was and what they wanted from him. Rob said that the princess's carriage was approaching Orang, and they would arrive in 3 or 4 hours. Dawn knew she shouldn't worry, as the master should go with Princess Anna. On that crucial day, she refused the glass offered by that man, because from the beginning she knew he would find a woman of his caliber. Even knowing this, the brunette longed to be a little closer to her beloved. Upon seeing Orang for the first time, Princess Anna found it gloomy and dirty. There is nowhere to stroll, nor sail, so she didn't understand what Exar saw in this place. Anna is furious. If it weren't for him, she would never come to this filthy hole. The princess was 5 years old, and she met him in the green and fragrant royal garden. Then she saw a boy with beautiful eyes, with sparkling gems instead of eyes. At that moment, young Princess Anna exclaimed that she wanted those eyes, and she wanted them now. The court lady explained to Her Highness that the boy had lost his father. Asking for mercy, young Anna asked about his mother, and Exar sadly replied that she was dead. Like hers, The boy knelt before her highness and politely asked if she really wanted his eyes. She extended her little hand towards his face, while Exar said that in return he would give her something interesting. And then, that small and enigmatic boy carefully extended his thin, childish hands. There, right in his palms, unexpectedly rested a small, live green frog. Exar explained that if the young princess dared to kiss that frog, she would undoubtedly find true happiness. In that awkward and unexpected moment, the impudent frog jumped, landing right on her highness's frightened face. While Anna screamed in terror, the blonde boy walked away, humming a simple but cheerful melody. Their next important meeting was when the young princess turned 16, and he followed in his father's footsteps. Exar was very young, but he had already fully inherited his noble title and vast lands. Seeing the grown princess, the blonde jokingly asked if she was the famous frog princess. Anna, with pride and hauteur, ordered him to go on his way immediately. To her amazement, he, simply and calmly, walked away without further ado. The princess shouted that if he touched her again, she would regret it, but he replied that they were no longer children. Exar always had a special and mysterious charm that powerfully attracted everyone. Suddenly, to her surprise, the young man turned sharply and approached Anna with determination. He politely asked official permission to braid her highness's long and beautiful hair. Soon everything was ready, and the frog princess could calmly assess the splendid work of the count's son. Anna was clearly pleased, so she suggested they play together, but he refused. The sweet floral scent emanated from the thick hair that the hero was carefully braiding. Exar disappeared discreetly, but Anna, stubborn, followed him closely. It was then that she clearly saw the brutal punch the boy landed on someone's face. In that moment of unease, Anna knew she wanted him, that she desired him completely. If it weren't for Exar, she would never have ended up there, in that unfamiliar place. Seeing the commoners crowded behind the dirty window, the princess understood the source of the stench. Apparently, those people were seeing a member of royalty for the first time. Even their luxurious carriage, a father with his little one, and a girl offering her fresh flowers approached. Anna, disgusted, covered her nose and immediately turned her face with a stern gesture. Immediately after, she ordered her inept servants to close the carriage window at once. The maid obeyed the order instantly, and Anna added that this is why they shouldn't show their faces to the commoners. The maid instantly rang a small bell, to which a knight in the street immediately reacted. The man quickly dispersed the crowd of poor people from the princess's carriage, and ordered them not to dare look at her. As a result, all the commoners knelt submissively and bowed their heads humbly downwards. Anna smiled self-assuredly, seeing this humiliating scene. Although he is a noble aristocrat, Exar has a very unpleasant habit. He gives too much freedom to commoners. Anna got very angry at first when he told her not to come, but given the man's character, it's normal. Despite all his words, the girl was still firmly planning to stay in that place. She couldn't believe she would ever be in such a place, until this very moment. The brother quietly informed Anna that a new rival had appeared in Count Exar's lands. The girl, skeptical, asked if Exar would dare make her his official wife. If her brother told her nothing, Anna would find out who that woman was. Soon the carriage arrived, and the princess majestically stepped out onto the street. They didn't even remove the snow. Did they do it on purpose to humiliate her? Seeing a neglected snowman, Anna ordered that thing to be removed. Exar shone in his absence, as if he ignored that her highness had arrived. Only servants received her. What an insult to her person. There aren't even any brave knights. Something totally unacceptable. Anna noticed a servant looking up at the destroyed snowman. Then, the girl lowered her head submissively once more. But it was already too late. That woman aroused Anna's curiosity, so she approached her unhurriedly. The princess didn't even give an order, but the knight had already brought her a long whip. Anna grabbed it abruptly and brandished it furiously, and the next second, she struck the insolent brazen woman. A complacent and malicious smile appeared on her highness's lips. Diane did not react at all, and her face remained completely stony, without a single emotion. Anna did not like at all that this woman did not emit a single sound, so she immediately decided to strike her once more with her long whip. Only this time, her raised hand was suddenly stopped. Anna, very indignant, asked Knight Exar what the hell he thought he was doing. She furiously ordered him to let go immediately, and the princess's soldiers immediately brandished their swords. They all menacingly pointed their sharp weapons directly at Rob. Dawn, in a soft voice, almost whispering, begged Rob to release her highness's hand. The man obeyed, and the princess called him rude, someone who had no idea who he was messing with. Rob replied with disdain that she was just some chick who arrived by carriage and was now shouting in the middle of the dirty street. Anna angrily told Rob that she would remember his name very well and promised that he would pay dearly for his insolence. However, Rob didn't care. He remained impassive, firm in his position. That's why Anna hated leaving the city, because it was full of ignorant savages and barbarians everywhere. Upon entering the old castle, the princess immediately noticed that it was also incredibly dirty. The princess immediately ordered her personal maid to give her a new glove. And impeccable, having obtained what she wanted, Anna majestically approached the castle employee. And then, with all her strength, she struck the insolent woman directly in the face with the glove. Finally, Exar deigned to appear and greet her. The man asked his faithful assistant if such an unexpected visitor had really arrived. Anna extended her hand solemnly. Even if Exar forgot etiquette in this remote place, he still knows how to greet a princess. The blonde only bowed slightly, almost imperceptibly, without showing due respect. The princess frowned at the thought that Exar didn't want to kiss her hand at all. The man straightened up and immediately reminded Her Highness that he had already asked her not to come. She is supposed to be able to read, so the man began to think that the letter simply couldn't have arrived. Anna replied that she had seen everything. She just decided to ignore it so as not to ruin her mood. It turns out that the princess arrived here with an order from the king, who was very strict and demanding of his subjects. He wanted to personally see the famous slave, about whom many rumors circulated among aristocrats and commoners. Apparently, her name is Daeon, and she really attracted the attention of everyone around her with her unusual charm. Anna approached her beloved, touched him, and sweetly asked if she had the right to all those emotions and feelings. However, Exar coldly ordered her to take her hands off him, as if her touch were unpleasant and alien. Princess Anna began to scream indignantly, not understanding why her beloved reacted so sharply to her care. The man revealed that his wife is in that place, and he doesn't want her to see another woman touching him. Anna irritably informed him that she would never have thought he would say that, as she had always considered him a decent person. The girl did not understand what had changed since their last meeting, as she would not ignore his words for anything. The princess did not want to hear that this was a slave, because by law she could not be family, and even less his wife. Jeffar stepped forward and told the princess that she was completely right about what she thought was happening. What is not understood is why Her Highness assumed she was a slave. She could be mistaken in her conclusions. Exar reminded her that he had already asked her not to come. Anna asked if he really thought she would listen to him and leave without explanation or talking to him. The young woman was fed up with polite aristocrats. She preferred difficult men to dominate and who broke the rules. Jeffar informed his lord that Daeon was outside and ready to enter the hall to meet the princess. And Exar, she said that the right thing would be to go out to greet the princess and show respect for her high status. Anna understood that this girl was the slave herself, but she had not seen the girl Exar was in love with, and that caused her unease and jealousy at the same time. Exar wanted to bring her, and it showed on her face that they had seen each other before. A couple of minutes later, Daeon entered the castle. Exar's eyes widened in surprise upon seeing his old acquaintance and her condition, but instantly, fury invaded his gaze upon noticing the blows on her face and understanding why. A recent mark stood out on Daeon's face, proof of a blow that obviously enraged him. The man approached her and gently touched her face. Containing his anger, Exar severely asked who had done this to her and why she hadn't told him. Daeon replied that she had fallen in the kitchen, but he demanded the truth, without deceit or secrets. The brunette lied, saying she had fallen flat on her face, trying to hide the truth about her condition. That slave knew her place, but the princess called her foolish without any respect. Obviously, Exar heard it and instantly understood everything. He slowly turned on his heel and began to scan the surroundings looking for whoever dared to hurt his beloved. Then he headed towards the knight's armor, intending to take a sword to protect his girl from possible threats. Immediately after, he snatched the sword from there and felt an adrenaline rush due to the need to protect those he loves. And silently, he unsheathed it in front of everyone present in the hall. Jeffar immediately tried to stop his lord, aware of the danger such an act represented in that situation. But it was too late, because Exar was determined to settle scores with anyone who dared to offend his beloved. Princess Anna looked at the man with visible tension. Jeffar noticed that His Highness's maid became alarmed and ran out to call the knights for help. Exar brandished the sword and shattered the knight's armor. They crashed onto the floor with a bang. The man's lips moved slowly. He promised to finish off anyone who harmed Dayan, man or beast. Then, Exar carelessly threw the broken sword at His Highness's feet. Anna asked indifferently if that was a warning, to which the man replied that he was glad for her quick understanding. The princess could not believe that her rival was seriously just a simple slave. Exar, annoyed, begged her not to make him laugh, since Her Highness wasn't worth even Dayan's toenail. The blonde approached Princess Anna and declared that he felt absolutely nothing for her. The princess started screaming, demanding that Exar kill that woman immediately or she would act herself. But that had no effect on the man. Anna was indignant because the count had no intention of obeying a royal order. She is the daughter of His Majesty. Therefore, her word weighs as much as her father's. Exar reminded the arrogant young woman that he was the one in charge there. Anna reminded him that all the lands of the country belong to the king. Even the most ignorant barbarian knows that. He only tolerates it because Exar is to his liking. It's that simple. Suddenly, Exar bowed his head to Her Highness, but it seemed the man was mocking Princess Anna. The silence was broken by a loud burst of laughter from the knight. Anna cursed mentally and vowed to see that knight's head roll. Then she recounted that she had come there because her father wanted their relationship to become closer, like that of a couple. The king will arrive next spring and will celebrate the engagement. Then they will marry before winter. An order from the king will arrive soon, so Exar must prepare. Anna was sure that the man could not answer that, much less change anything. The princess directed her gaze at Dayan. It was ridiculous to even think that a slave could get ahead of her. Anna could forgive Exar for infidelity before the engagement, but she won't stay quiet like this after the wedding. The man looks at another woman. Exar will be obliged to behave like royalty. The man mockingly asked if hitting people in the face was behaving like royalty, to which the girl replied that it was nonsense, since only the two of them were people there. For Exar, only the princess thought that. But Anna affirmed that all aristocrats thought that way. She doesn't plan to live in a hole where you can't even organize a ball. Exar agreed that Orang was a very small territory. However, this place perfectly reveals the inner beauty of girls. He asked the princess if this place would reveal her true personality. Anna annoyedly asked what he meant by that, if he intended to disobey the king and offend her. At that moment, Sephar interrupted and suggested that Her Highness rest after the trip and resolve everything later. No one in this country can disobey the king. Her Highness knows that perfectly well. Jeffar's words took effect. The princess headed for the exit, thinking about the unbearable character of her beloved, and that she simply had no escape. Anna couldn't believe Exar had lost his mind over a mere Dayan. Upon reaching her room, the princess furiously shouted for everyone to leave, and her alone. At those times, her father and brother always solved her problems. Now, she didn't understand why everything had changed like this. Until now, she had gotten everything she wanted, but the damned Exar had changed everything. The princess decided to go out to the terrace for some fresh air. Just then, she saw Dayan carrying a bucket of water. Anna wondered what had attracted Exar to a girl of non-noble origin. It bothered her that the man found something good in that Dayan. The princess noticed how Exar approached the slave. The blonde asked Dayan if they could speak privately right now. Exar approached and asked his beloved why she lied, saying she just fell. He knew Anna was behind this, so he begged Dayan not to hide anything from him if it happened again. The brunette wanted to reply, but Exar abruptly grabbed her and asked her to listen to him. If Dayan hides again that she was hit, the blonde doesn't know what else Princess Anna might do. To which the girl replied that every person has their place and must know it. Exar's face darkened. Meanwhile, Dayan added that it was time for them to return to their worlds. This cannot go on forever. The count was born into a noble family and was raised to rule the world. But Dayan is just a slave who was lucky enough to survive misery. If his lordship now rejects the marriage with the princess, he will end up at odds with the royal family for life. Exar abruptly grabbed Dayan by the arm and pulled her towards him, shouting at her not to dare say that in front of him. The young woman, with a sweet smile, confessed that she loved him and would keep those days in her memory. But Exar did not want to live only in memories. Suddenly, Dayan asked what she could do in his position. Upon hearing these words, Exar could not contain his outburst of anger. He abruptly pulled his beloved by the waist and then kissed her passionately, clinging to her lips. The bucket Dayan had brought to draw water fell to the bottom of the well. Pulling away from his beloved's lips, the man hugged her tightly and confessed that he was already scared. He started to worry because the girl showed no feeling. The only thing she seemed to do was exist. Exar understood the future that awaited an aristocrat in his situation. They would surely hang or decapitate him, but he is not one to abandon his ship for fear of the storm. He will not give up so easily. Back in his office, Exar took out a map and spread it on the table, focused on his plan. To protect his home, which was on the verge of ruin, the Count feigned complete disinterest in politics. Slowly but inexorably, Exar gained power. Because in that country, true authority resides in the aristocrats, not the royalty. If he gets rid of the greedy and inept aristocrats, he could still save this country. There is hope. Exar did not accumulate forces in secret by chance, and Orang surrendered without resistance, so there were no casualties. If he is going to act, the time is now. There is no time to lose. The Count asked his assistant if they had already moved the forces from the occupied territories. Zephyr reported that they had already dismantled and transported the siege artillery to the designated location. The cavalry awaits orders. Exar replied that they would take them all at once. If they fail, they will lose. But they must take that step. The secretary reminded them that they have a problem. They need very many hostages. If the wedding takes place in the royal castle, the entire plan is cancelled. That is why it must be precisely in Orang. Even the maps drawn during the trips were useful. Normally, only the king has maps of the entire country. Zephyr reported that they have very few allies, and when they find out that this is a war over a woman, they will abandon them. This is precisely why they urgently need to make friends with the aristocrats. They can reorganize the internal structure of the occupied territories, exactly as they did in Orang. Punish criminals, conduct population surveys, reduce taxes, strengthen medicine and education. In other words, we could call it a revolution. Exar promised that when their day of victory came, he would buy the best alcohol. Down knocked on the office door and informed the lord that she had finished organizing the museum. After inspecting everything, the man concluded that the girl had done an excellent job, and now she deserved a reward. Upstairs in the annex, there is a library containing classics and even erotic novels. If Dawn wants to read something, she must notify him. And then the man asked where she learned to read and write. The brunette shyly replied that Count Dalbury taught her everything. That's why she used to visit him late at night. Exar declared his desire to rule together. Starting today, the Count transfers Daeon's tasks in the kitchen and other chores to other people. The girl clearly has skills, but the brunette recalled that the problem remains her origin. Exar asked with disgust if she really wanted to fight with him now. The young woman froze upon hearing that her beloved had decided to get engaged. The blonde clenched his fist tightly, wishing in his mind that his beloved would stop him from this reckless idea. He didn't want Daeon to shut down again, so he gently touched her face and then pulled her towards him and kissed her tenderly but insistently. When they parted, the man affectionately asked his beloved to call him only by his name from now on. He deliberately leaned down and offered his ear. Daeon leaned closer and called the man by his name. It sounded quite sensual. The man sat on the sofa, extended his hand, and asked Daeon to come closer, since as a reward, he would spend the day with her. Dao didn't think much of it and sat down next to him. Exar kissed her immediately. He threw her onto the bed and lifted one of her legs. Soon, Princess Anna learned that her beloved was spending time with that irritating woman. She was not going to tolerate that. In this country, there was no one who opposed her. The princess always got what she wanted. Even the king listened to her wishes. But for some reason, Exar always resisted her will. A maid entered the room and informed Her Highness that the ornament merchant had already arrived. At the entrance, Anna noticed a woman trembling with fear. The princess gave permission for the guest to enter. The woman displayed her entire assortment of jewelry in front of Her Highness, so that the princess could examine everything in detail. Anna noticed that there were many interesting things. When the princess carefully checked everything, without anyone seeing her, a woman handed her a secret letter. Viscount Sergok ordered that it be delivered. The next morning, Count Exar was sitting on the street, carving a piece of wood. Anna approached him and told him that the man had sunk so low that he was doing things that commoners normally do. Exar calmly replied to the young noblewoman that it was his hobby, and the princess ordered the man to give her his creation. However, the man replied that he had made that piece especially for his beloved. Therefore, the statuette already has another owner. Of course, those words infuriated Princess Anna and once again hurt her pride. Getting up, Exar revealed that his beloved also felt something for him, but that she agreed to marry the princess. Hearing that, a triumphant smile appeared on Anna's face. She touched the man's shoulder and replied that the most important thing was that she loved him. But Exar abruptly pushed the princess's hand away and told her that he completely didn't care. He just wanted to warn her that, even after the wedding, he didn't intend to treat her like his wife. Abruptly grabbing Anna by the arm, Exar demanded that she not dare touch his beloved even with one finger. This is the first and only warning. Anger appeared on Anna's face, but she perfectly understood that she could not respond or reply in any way. Exar was about to leave, but the princess told him that that night they would receive a visit from a member of the royalty, and he couldn't be rude. The count would find out later who exactly was coming. Daeon was on her way to her duties when, suddenly, two of Princess Anna's maids approached her. They brutally grabbed her by the hands and informed her that Her Highness requested the slave's presence. At that very moment, the knight informed the count that a guest of the princess had arrived and was waiting at the gates. Exar was petrified when he heard that it was Viscount Surgok. Sephar, anticipating his lord's actions, exclaimed that they must allow the guest into the castle. Otherwise, the princess would send a letter to the royal palace. And if that happened, Prince Zak might come. They need to keep Anna in Iran until next spring. Therefore, Exar must endure 3 months. They cannot allow Prince Zak to find out about their plans. The blonde swore, realizing that from the beginning he should have cut off that bastard Surgok's head. He didn't want Daeon to relive unpleasant memories, as she still sleeps poorly at night. Will she really have to spend the rest of spring under the same roof as the man who turned her life into a nightmare? But if the count wants Daeon by his side, he must make the right decision. Exar sighed deeply and asked them to tell Daeon that, until the end of winter, she could only move around the bedroom and only with him during the day. They abruptly sat the brunette in front of the princess, and Anna told her that she had obtained everything she desired in her life. So now she was simply going to warn the slave. Daeon noticed how Her Highness took out a needle. The maids roughly placed the slave's hand on the table and held it tightly so she couldn't pull it away. Princess Anna began her educational act. Soon Daeon's hand was covered in pricks, from which small drops of blood welled up. But the expression on the brunette's face remained impassive. This greatly infuriated Her Highness, and she called the impudent young woman foul names. And then she slapped her in the face with all her might, so that the ugly one wouldn't forget her place. Anna remembered the Pegasus that Exar gave her, so she ordered Daeon to bring it immediately. But the brunette replied confidently that she would not. For such rudeness, the maids began to beat the young woman. From the slave's pocket fell a small red pouch, which immediately attracted Her Highness's attention. As soon as Anna took it in her hands, Daeon, worried, asked her to return her thing. The princess began to be puzzled upon seeing common dry grass inside the pouch. There was clearly something else inside, so Her Highness cut the red bag with scissors. Immediately, a beautiful gold ring with a ruby in the center fell out of it, shining beautifully. Anna was paralyzed as soon as she realized that ring belonged to Exar's mother. Daeon froze upon hearing that. She didn't even imagine that she possessed such a thing. Exar had proposed to her some time ago, keeping his beloved mother's ring in a rosemary pouch. A maid entered the room. She informed Her Highness about the arrival of a guest. Anna smiled maliciously and ordered the brunette not to reveal today's incident to anyone, and then the pouch would be returned. Otherwise, the princess promised to burn that pouch and throw the ring into the moat. If that happened, Dawn knew for sure that she would never manage to find that precious ring. To survive the winter in this nest of vipers, Anna invented an interesting game. Since Dawn will now always come to her, the brunette asked the princess when she would return the pouch and the ring. Anna replied that she would do it on the wedding day. This being the case, Daeon asked the princess to swear in the name of His Majesty that she would keep her word. The slave's audacity astonished Anna, but she swore anyway. Returning to her room, Daeon unintentionally overheard 2 voices, one of which belonged to Exar. She froze upon recognizing the owner of the second voice. The count was next to Viscount Surgok, and they were discussing something. Daeon leaned against the wall and wondered why her nightmare had returned to Orank. She didn't understand when all this would end, and if the end of this pain would ever come. And suffering. At that very moment, Exar approached the young woman and asked why such a lovely lady was in that place. The count understood. Daeon already knows that pig is here. He told her that he had already ordered Sephar to prepare a very long pole so that pig would sleep. Then, the man took his beloved in his arms and suggested returning. Since it was raining and the protagonists were soaked, Exar suggested warming up and bathing together. The Viscount observed all this from his room window. Daeon noticed him, and a fleeting horror was reflected on her face. From his inner pocket, Surgok pulled out his severed hand and gestured that the girl would not live. Immediately after, the Viscount went to an audience with Her Highness. It only took a glance at the contract for Anne to understand that the Viscount was illegally keeping the foreigner in slavery. The man explained that there was confusion in the country at that moment, so no one paid attention to that detail. In any case, that slave belongs to him. The princess wearily asked the aristocrat what he wanted to get from her. The Viscount replied that he only wants the king to help him and make the right decision. He knew that, by law, all lands in this country belonged to the royal artist family. But even so, if the king were kind, he could grant Surgok this small territory as property. But if the man wants to show his loyalty, the princess needs actions, not words. Surgok replied that this is what he was going to do, only he wants to get his slave back first. In that case, the Viscount will not allow that slave to meet with Exar again, and it would be ideal for the princess. Anna smiled scornfully and promised to report this to her father. Finally, lately, her mood improved. The Viscount decided to warn Her Highness that the Count might have some plan, and she should be cautious. Upon hearing the theory of a rebellion, Anna burst out laughing at such ridiculousness. First, Exar would never do that for a simple slave. And second, the Count does not have the power for it. It took the blonde a long time to conquer a territory as small as Orank. The Viscount asked where the wedding ceremony would be, and the princess replied, in the castle of Orank. Surgok suggested to Her Highness to move the celebration to the royal palace and to keep an eye on the Count. But Anne didn't need such useless advice, although she still asked a servant for paper, ink, and a pen. But on the other hand, Exar cannot be underestimated. Anne decided to move the wedding to the royal castle, and, following the Viscount's advice, she would return at the end of the month. Right at that moment, Jeffer was on the street. Suddenly, Dawn approached him. A short while ago, her face was expressionless, but now it showed determination and calm, which pleased Jeffer. Suddenly, he noticed the wounds on the young woman's hand. The boy, confused, asked Dawn what was wrong with her hand. Just then, the Viscount approached, and with a cunning smile asked who was there. It was the same slave who fled from her master. But Sephar asked the Viscount not to be rude to the lady. This outraged Sephar, so he shouted, "How dare a nobody silence a great aristocrat?" Sephar calmly replied, he was not just any commoner. The Lord entrusted him to watch this place in his absence. The Count's assistant apologized, since from the beginning he should have offered the guest delicious food. For example, human meat. Daeon and Surgok froze upon hearing those words. Sephar asked the Viscount not to worry, as they might find something better, since he likes young girls. If the Viscount's secret reaches the royal family's ears, the king will never allow him to live. Something like that is eradicated. So, if Surko wants Sephar to remain silent, he must not be rude to Daeon, not even a little bit more. The Viscount could not reply anything, so he simply left the young man and walked away. Jeffer perfectly understood that Lady Dawn did not want to talk about what happened when she was held captive by that horrible man. But the strangest thing was that every day the young woman told the Count's assistant that she had been invited to tea, and she went with the princess. Just in case, Jeffer decided to report all of this to his lord. Early in the morning, upon returning to the castle, the first thing Exar did was go train with the knights. With utmost ease, he managed to defeat the knight. Just then, Jeffer ran up to him and exclaimed that they needed to talk urgently. The young man told him that, lately, Lady Dawn went somewhere too often. Exar's face darkened, and he asked since when this was happening. Jeffer revealed that he had suspected something for 2 days. The Count asked where she was going, since the assistant surely came to report about that. Before answering, Jeffard reminded him that if his plan fails, they will lose everything. So the Count must be more restrained. Now, the assistant advised building a separate house for Lady Dawn, so she could live there peacefully. Exar shouted furiously, asking where she was. He went somewhere himself, which scared Jeffard, who asked his lord not to jump to conclusions. He immediately ordered the knights to gather, because in that state, Lord Exar could do anything.